It's been over 50 years since we first set foot on the moon. Since then, NASA and engineers worldwide have dreamed of building permanent bases up there. It seemed like the obvious next step, almost easy. It turns out, the closer we look, the more terrible problems we discover. Lunar dust, for example, isn't like the dust in your house. It's made of microscopic, sharp pieces of glass that cut spacesuits and can destroy an astronaut's lungs. On top of that, the temperature changes by hundreds of degrees, from heat that boils water to freezing cold, all in a single lunar day. This forced scientists to ask a shocking question. How can we live in a place that actively tries to destroy us on such a small, constant level? Prepare to fall asleep while listening to this video as we uncover these hidden challenges. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where in the world you are watching from. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Imagine trying to build a home where the very ground beneath your feet is working against you, where dust isn't just a nuisance but an active threat that could sabotage everything. That is the stark reality of lunar regolith, the pervasive dust that covers the moon, and it presents one of the most formidable challenges to establishing a permanent human presence there. This material is not like anything we encounter on Earth. It is the product of billions of years of meteoroid impacts that have pulverized the lunar surface into a fine, jagged powder, without any atmosphere to provide weathering through wind or water. Each individual particle remains sharp and abrasive, essentially tiny fragments of glass and mineral that can cut and grind with alarming efficiency. When you walk on the moon, this dust kicks up and clings to every surface due to electrostatic charges generated by solar radiation, creating a persistent coating that is incredibly difficult to remove. The Apollo astronauts experienced this firsthand, reporting that the regolith covered their spacesuits, obscured their visors, and infiltrated their equipment, leading to operational headaches and potential hazards. For instance, the abrasive nature of the dust caused scratches on camera lenses and helmet faceplates, impairing visibility, and it jammed zippers and mechanical joints, compromising the integrity of their suits. Inside the lunar module, the dust became an unwelcome guest, irritating their eyes and lungs and threatening sensitive electronics with short circuits. These were short-term missions. Imagine the cumulative effects over months or years in a lunar base. The constant exposure would degrade solar panels, reducing their power output, and wear down moving parts in machinery, leading to frequent failures that are difficult to repair so far from Earth. But the dangers go beyond equipment damage. The health implications of lunar dust are profoundly concerning. When inhaled, the fine particles can penetrate deep into the human respiratory system because the dust is composed of sharp, glassy shards. It can cause inflammation and scarring in the lungs, akin to silicosis, a serious and incurable disease affecting miners and construction workers on Earth. In the confined environment of a lunar habitat, where air is recycled and space is limited, preventing dust inhalation becomes a critical life-saving measure. The particles are so small and adhesive that they can easily become airborne during daily activities, posing a continuous risk to astronauts' health. Moreover, the electrostatic properties mean that dust doesn't just settle. It actively attaches to surfaces, including skin and clothing, increasing the likelihood of exposure. To mitigate these risks, engineers and scientists are developing a multi-pronged approach. One key strategy involves advanced decontamination systems at airlocks, where astronauts would undergo thorough cleaning before entering living quarters. This might include using vacuums with HEPA filters, electrostatic brushes, or even air showers to dislodge and capture dust particles. Another avenue is the development of new materials for spacesuits and habitat surfaces that resist dust adhesion. Research is exploring coatings inspired by non-stick technologies or surfaces with microtextures that minimize contact area, making it harder for dust to stick. For example, some experiments use materials that generate a repulsive electrostatic charge to push dust away. Additionally, There is interest in utilizing the regolith itself in construction processes, such as using microwaves or concentrated sunlight to sinter the dust into solid blocks for building habitats. However, this process can generate more dust, so it requires careful handling and containment. Ongoing studies on the International Space Station and in lunar simulation chambers on Earth are helping us understand how regolith behaves in low gravity and vacuum conditions. These experiments test everything from dust filtration systems to the long-term durability of materials exposed to simulated lunar dust. Robotics also play a crucial role. Autonomous rovers could be deployed to regularly clean external surfaces like solar panels and habitat exteriors, reducing the dust load. Furthermore, operational protocols are being designed to minimize dust generation, such as having designated dirty and clean zones, and using sealed containers for equipment storage. Education and training for astronauts will emphasize dust awareness and proper handling procedures to reduce exposure. The economic implications are significant too. If not addressed, the dust problem could lead to increased mission costs due to frequent equipment replacements and potential health-related evacuations. Solving the regolith challenge is not merely a technical hurdle. It is a fundamental requirement for the sustainability of any long-term lunar activity, whether for scientific research, resource extraction, or as a stepping stone for deeper space exploration. The success of future missions depends on our ability to tame this dusty environment, ensuring that astronauts can live and work safely on the Moon. Without effective solutions, our aspirations for a lunar colony could be stifled by the very ground we seek to inhabit, turning a dream of expansion into a lesson in humility. So, as we look to the stars and plan our next giant leap, we must remember that the smallest particles, the dust of the Moon, demand our utmost attention and innovation. The journey to conquer lunar regolith is just beginning, and it will require collaboration across disciplines and nations to overcome this gritty obstacle. From materials scientists to aerospace engineers, everyone has a role to play in developing the technologies and strategies that will allow humanity to thrive in this harsh new frontier. The lessons learned here will not only benefit lunar exploration, but could also inform how we handle dust on Mars or other celestial bodies. In the end, understanding and mitigating the perils of lunar dust is about more than just survival. It is about creating a future where humans can truly live and work beyond Earth, turning a hostile environment into a home. The path forward is dusty, but with persistence and creativity, we can sweep away the challenges and build a lasting presence on the Moon. But if you think the dust is bad, wait until you experience the temperature swings. The Moon doesn't do anything by halves, and its thermal environment is the most extreme in the entire solar system, creating a nightmare for any machinery or human trying to live there. Picture this: one moment, you're in blistering sunlight, hot enough to boil water, and the next, you're plunged into a deep freeze colder than any place on Earth. And these conditions last for weeks on end. This wild ride happens because a single day on the Moon, from one sunrise to the next, lasts about 14 Earth days, and the night that follows is just as long, a full 2 weeks of darkness. Without any atmosphere to trap heat or distribute it evenly, the surface literally bakes under the direct sun, reaching temperatures around 127 degrees Celsius, and then plummets to minus 173 degrees Celsius when the sun sets. That is a temperature swing of 300 degrees, and it happens not gradually, but relatively quickly as the Terminator line, the dividing line between day and night, sweeps across the landscape. For any structure sitting on the surface, this means enduring constant and brutal thermal cycling. Metals expand when heated and contract when cooled, and doing this over and over again for years on end introduces immense mechanical stress. Imagine a habitat module. Its outer shell is repeatedly stretched and squeezed, which can lead to fatigue, microfractures, and ultimately, failure of welds and seals. This is not a theoretical problem. The Apollo landers had to deal with this during their short stays. But for a permanent base, the cumulative effect over thousands of cycles could be catastrophic. Every component, from the largest structural beam to the smallest screw, must be designed and tested to withstand this expansion and contraction without compromising integrity. Electrical systems are particularly vulnerable. Circuit boards can crack, solder joints can fail, and insulation on wires can become brittle and crack over time. Moreover, the extreme cold of the lunar night makes many materials behave differently. Plastics can become as brittle as glass, and lubricants can freeze solid, causing moving parts to seize up. This thermal reality forces engineers to rethink material selection entirely, often opting for specialized alloys and composites with low coefficients of thermal expansion. But even these have their limits. Then there is the issue of temperature management inside the habitat itself. Astronauts need a stable, comfortable environment to live and work, which requires a robust thermal control system. On the International Space Station, this is achieved through a complex system of heat exchangers, radiators, and coolant loops. But the Moon presents a unique challenge because of the long night. During the day, the base will absorb immense heat from the sun and from internal equipment like computers and life support systems, which must be rejected to space to prevent overheating. But during the night, there is no sun, and the habitat loses heat rapidly to the cold blackness of space, risking freezing. So, the thermal system must not only dump heat but also conserve it when necessary, a tricky balancing act. One proposed solution is to use phase change materials that store heat during the day and release it slowly at night. But developing such systems for the scale of a base is still in research phases. Another idea is to bury the habitats under a layer of regolith, using the soil as insulation to dampen the temperature swings. This regolith shielding approach kills two birds with one stone, as it also provides protection from radiation and micrometeorites. But it introduces its own set of challenges, like how to excavate and move large amounts of dust without the abrasive particles causing damage. The energy problem is perhaps the most immediate consequence of this day-night cycle. Solar power, the most straightforward and reliable source of energy in space, becomes completely useless during the 2-week-long night. You cannot simply rely on batteries to bridge that gap. The amount of energy storage required would be astronomically heavy and expensive to launch from Earth. For example, to power a modest base through the lunar night, you would need batteries weighing many tons, which is not feasible with current technology. This has led to serious consideration of alternative power sources, with nuclear fission reactors emerging as a leading contender. These compact reactors could provide a constant, reliable source of heat and electricity, regardless of the time of day, but they come with their own complexities, such as handling radioactive materials, managing waste heat, and ensuring safety in case of accidents. The public perception and political will to deploy nuclear power on the Moon also add layers of difficulty. Other concepts include generating power from the temperature difference itself, using systems that exploit the gradient between the hot surface during the day and the colder subsurface. But such technology is still in its infancy. So, what does this mean for the base operations? It likely means that the base would have to operate in a sort of hibernation mode during the night, scaling back non-essential systems and activities to conserve energy. Imagine the crew having to power down experiments, reduce lighting, and limit communication to only critical updates for 14 days straight, all while confined indoors in the cold and dark. This has profound implications for productivity and psychological well-being. Furthermore, any surface operations, like rovers or construction robots, would need to be designed to survive the night, either by going into a dormant state with built-in heaters, or by having dedicated shelters where they can recharge and warm up. The development of such systems is actively underway, with agencies like NASA testing prototypes in analog environments on Earth. For instance, in Antarctica, there are research stations that experience long periods of darkness, and they use a combination of diesel generators and wind turbines. But on the Moon, you cannot rely on fossil fuels or wind, so the solutions must be entirely novel. The cost of developing and deploying these power systems is enormous, and it directly impacts the timeline and feasibility of establishing a base. Every component must be over-engineered for reliability because a failure during the night could mean the loss of the entire base. If a heating system fails, water lines could freeze and burst, or electronics could be permanently damaged. If a power system fails, life support could shut down. Therefore, redundancy is key. But redundancy adds weight and complexity. Another subtle effect of the temperature extremes is on the lunar regolith itself. The soil undergoes thermal cycling too, which can cause it to shift and settle, potentially undermining foundations of structures over time. This phenomenon, called thermal walk, can cause rocks to slowly move, or even cause landslides on slopes, adding another layer of instability to construction sites. All these factors combine to make thermal management one of the most fundamental, yet often overlooked, challenges of lunar habitation. It is not as visibly dramatic as a dust storm or as immediately threatening as radiation, but it is a constant, grinding pressure that will test the limits of human engineering. Solving it requires a holistic approach, integrating materials, science, power systems, architecture, and operational planning. As we move forward with plans for the Lunar Gateway and Artemis missions, these thermal considerations are at the forefront of design discussions. The lessons learned from dealing with the Moon's extremes will also be invaluable for future missions to Mars, where day-night cycles are shorter but the environment is still harsh. In the end, conquering the thermal challenge is about more than just survival. It is about creating a stable and efficient home where science and exploration can thrive. It is a puzzle that demands innovation, patience, and a deep understanding of the lunar environment. And it is a puzzle we must solve to ensure that humanity's return to the Moon is not just a visit, but a permanent stay. The path forward is hot and cold, but with careful planning and cutting-edge technology, we can build a base that withstands the test of time and temperature. And just when you think you've got a handle on the heat and the cold, another even more insidious challenge rears its head, one you cannot see or feel until it is too late: radiation. The Moon, lacking the protective blankets that make life on Earth possible, is bombarded by a constant stream of high-energy particles from the Sun and deep space, creating an environment where unprotected exposure is a guaranteed death sentence. This isn't like getting a sunburn. This is about subatomic bullets tearing through your very cells. Earth is blessed with a robust magnetic field that deflects most of this dangerous radiation and a thick atmosphere that absorbs and scatters the rest. But the Moon has neither. It is a sitting duck in the cosmic shooting gallery, its surface exposed to the full fury of solar winds, solar particle events, and galactic cosmic rays. These aren't just simple particles, they are ions accelerated to nearly the speed of light. And when they slam into anything, whether it is a spacesuit, a habitat wall, or human tissue, they cause cascading damage on a microscopic level. Think of it like this. Every single proton and heavy nucleus hitting the surface is like a tiny but incredibly powerful bullet, and they come in a relentless, invisible shower. This radiation doesn't just stop at the surface. It can penetrate deep into materials. And for astronauts, that means it passes right through their bodies. The damage occurs when these particles smash into DNA strands within cells, causing breaks and mutations that the body's repair mechanisms struggle to fix. Over time, this accumulated damage drastically increases the risk of developing cancer, with estimates suggesting a long-term lunar resident could face a cancer risk several times higher than on Earth. But it is not just about cancer. The cardiovascular system is also vulnerable, with studies indicating that radiation exposure can lead to heart disease and circulatory problems later in life. Perhaps most alarmingly, there is growing evidence that this kind of radiation can cause damage to the central nervous system, potentially leading to cognitive decline, memory issues, and reduced motor function over extended missions. Imagine being on a multi-year mission and slowly finding it harder to think clearly or perform complex tasks. That is a terrifying prospect for mission success and crew safety. The electronics that run the base are equally at risk. These high-energy particles can cause single-event effects in microchips, flipping bits of memory from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, which can corrupt data, trigger software glitches, or even cause permanent hardware failure. A critical computer system restarting at the wrong moment during a life support operation could be catastrophic. This means that all avionics and computing systems need to be hardened against radiation, which involves using specialized and often slower, more expensive components that are less susceptible to these effects. So, how do we protect ourselves? The solutions are not simple, and they all involve significant trade-offs in mass, cost, and complexity. One of the most promising and straightforward concepts is to use the moon itself as a shield. By burying the habitats under several meters of regolith, we can create a natural barrier that absorbs the vast majority of incoming radiation. This is the same principle that makes a basement safer during a tornado. The dirt overhead stops the dangerous stuff. This approach has the dual benefit of also protecting against micrometeorites and helping to moderate those extreme temperature swings we talked about earlier. However, excavating and moving enough regolith to cover entire habitats is a massive engineering undertaking that would require powerful and reliable robotic machinery operating in a harsh environment. Another idea is to build habitats in pre-existing natural shelters, like lava tubes. These are giant caves formed by ancient volcanic activity, and they offer a ready-made roof of solid rock, potentially meters thick, that provides excellent protection. Orbital surveys have identified several candidate lava tubes, and sending rovers to scout them is a high priority for future missions. But building inside a cave comes with its own set of challenges, like ensuring structural stability, managing access, and providing power and light. Beyond using natural materials, researchers are developing advanced shielding materials that are more effective than aluminum, which is commonly used in spacecraft, but is relatively poor at stopping high-energy particles. These new materials might include composites infused with hydrogen, which is excellent at absorbing radiation, or even wearable shields for spacesuits. But every kilogram of shielding material launched from Earth costs a fortune, so there is a strong push for in-situ resource utilization, perhaps by extracting water ice and using its hydrogen content, or by manufacturing shielding bricks from the regolith itself. Active shielding is another futuristic concept, which involves creating an artificial magnetic field around the habitat to deflect charged particles, much like Earth's magnetosphere does. While scientifically sound, the power requirements and technical complexity of generating a sufficiently strong magnetic field make this a long-term prospect rather than a near-term solution. All of this means that life on the moon would be largely lived underground or in heavily shielded structures. Every foray onto the surface, every extravehicular activity, or EVA, becomes a carefully calculated risk. Astronauts would not be able to simply suit up and go for a walk. Mission planners would have to constantly monitor space weather, solar particle events, which are sudden, intense eruptions from the sun, can deliver a lethal dose of radiation in a matter of hours. Early warning systems are crucial, giving astronauts time to retreat to a dedicated radiation shelter, a small, heavily shielded room within the habitat, until the storm passes. Even during periods of quiet solar activity, the background level of galactic cosmic rays is always present, so each EVA would be timed and its duration limited to keep an astronaut's cumulative radiation dose as low as reasonably achievable. This philosophy would severely constrain surface operations, making construction, exploration, and science missions much slower and more methodical. Astronauts might carry personal dosimeters that constantly track their exposure, and mission rules would likely enforce strict rotation schedules to ensure no one person gets too much radiation. The psychological impact of living under this invisible threat should not be underestimated. Knowing that an invisible, silent danger is constantly penetrating your home, that a solar flare could force you into a cramped shelter for days, adds a layer of chronic stress to an already high-stakes environment. Furthermore, the radiation environment inside the habitat itself must be constantly monitored. Even with shielding, some secondary radiation is generated when primary particles collide with the shielding material, creating a shower of lower energy particles that can still be harmful. This requires sophisticated sensors and monitoring systems integrated into the life support to provide real-time data on exposure levels. The medical protocols for dealing with radiation exposure on the Moon are also uncharted territory. How do you treat acute radiation sickness so far from Earth? What are the long-term health monitoring requirements for astronauts who return from a multi-year tour on the lunar surface? These are questions that space medicine experts are grappling with right now. The development of radioprotective drugs, compounds that can be taken before or after exposure to mitigate cellular damage, is an active area of research, but nothing is yet approved for human use in space. Ultimately, solving the radiation problem is not optional. It is an absolute prerequisite for any long-term human presence on the Moon. It influences every aspect of base design, from the architecture and location to the daily schedule of the crew. The lessons we learn and the technologies we develop for lunar radiation protection will be directly applicable to the even greater challenge of sending humans to Mars, where the journey itself exposes astronauts to months of deep space radiation. By learning to live safely on the Moon, we are taking the first crucial steps toward becoming a truly spacefaring civilization, one that can withstand the harsh realities of the space environment. It is a daunting puzzle, but with a combination of natural shielding, advanced materials, and careful operational planning, we can create a safe haven for humanity on the lunar surface. The key is to respect the invisible danger and engineer our way around it, ensuring that the final frontier does not remain forever off limits to human exploration and settlement. This challenge requires international collaboration and sustained investment in research and technology, because the price of failure is unacceptably high. As we push the boundaries of human endurance, we must prioritize the health and safety of the pioneers who will call the Moon home, proving that we can not only visit, but truly live in worlds beyond our own. While shielding ourselves from radiation might mean retreating underground, that still leaves us with the constant, looming threat of the environment right outside our door, the perfect vacuum of space. This isn't just empty space, it's an active, aggressive absence of pressure that imposes a relentless physical force on every man-made structure, turning the simple act of containing breathable air into a high-stakes engineering battle. On Earth, we take atmospheric pressure for granted. It is always there, pushing in on us from all sides. But on the Moon, the pressure inside a habitat is all that stands between life and instant death, creating a balloon-like situation where the air inside is constantly trying to explode outward into the void. The difference in pressure between the inside of a module and the outside vacuum is tremendous, equivalent to about 1 Earth atmosphere pushing against every square inch of the habitat's walls. This means the structure itself must be incredibly strong and perfectly sealed, capable of withstanding this force not just for days, but for years, without a single point of failure. Imagine a tiny pinhole leak in this environment. It would not be a slow drip, but a violent, screaming torrent of air rushing out, depressurizing the entire module in minutes if not seconds, and suffocating anyone inside before they could even react. This places an immense emphasis on the integrity of every single component, from the largest aluminum panel to the smallest weld, and it makes things like doors and windows particularly terrifying vulnerabilities. Every hatch, every airlock door, every electrical conduit, pass-through, is a potential weak spot, a place where a seal could fail. The materials used must not only be strong, but also resistant to fatigue from the constant outward pressure, and they must endure the extreme thermal cycling we discussed earlier, which can cause metals to expand and contract, potentially compromising seals over time. Furthermore, the abrasive lunar dust we talked about is a nightmare for these sealing surfaces. If it gets into the mechanism of a door or a hatch seal, it can prevent a proper closure, leading to a catastrophic failure. This is why airlocks are designed with multiple layers of redundancy, often having 2 or more doors that are never open at the same time, creating a safe intermediate zone. But even with this, the process of entering or exiting the habitat, known as an extravehicular activity or EVA, is a complex, time-consuming and risky procedure. Before an astronaut can step outside, they must enter the airlock, close the inner door, and then slowly depressurize the chamber, allowing their bodies to adjust and ensuring that no air is trapped in their suits that could cause them to balloon out in the vacuum. This depressurization process can take 30 minutes or more, consuming valuable oxygen and power, and it requires the astronauts to pre-breathe a special mixture of gases, often pure oxygen, to avoid getting the bends, a condition where nitrogen bubbles form in the bloodstream. After the EVA, the whole process must be reversed. The airlock is repressurized, which also takes time and consumes more resources from the life support system. Every single time someone needs to go outside for maintenance, exploration, or construction, it is a major operational event, not a simple stroll. Now, consider the sheer number of these cycles over the lifespan of a base. Each cycle wears on the seals, the hinges, the pumps, and the valves, increasing the probability of a failure. Maintenance on these systems is not like fixing a leaky faucet on Earth. It might require astronauts to perform complex repairs in pressurized suits, or worse, it might necessitate depressurizing a whole module to access a faulty component, which would force the crew to evacuate that section and seal it off. The design of the habitat itself must facilitate this, with modular sections that can be isolated in case of an emergency leak. But identifying a leak quickly is another challenge. Sophisticated sensors would need to constantly monitor pressure levels throughout the base, pinpointing the location of any drop so that crews can respond immediately. This response would likely involve slapping an emergency patch over the suspected area, but in a chaotic situation, with alarms blaring and air rushing out, that is easier said than done. The psychological weight of living inside what is essentially a fragile tin can, knowing that a single micrometeorite impact or a structural fatigue crack could lead to instant decompression, cannot be overstated. It adds a layer of constant, low-grade stress to daily life, where every unusual sound or slight pressure fluctuation could trigger a panic. This environment also affects the equipment inside. Any electronic device that relies on air for cooling might overheat if the pressure drops, and fluids in hydraulic systems could boil off in the vacuum if exposed. The development of habitats is therefore focused on creating robust, multi-layered pressure vessels. Some concepts involve using inflatable modules, which are lightweight for launch, but are then covered with a rigid shell or layers of regolith for protection and to help contain the pressure. Others propose building structures entirely from sintered regolith blocks, creating thick, monolithic walls that are inherently strong and resistant to punctures. However, creating a perfect, airtight seal between these blocks or around doors and windows in such a material is an enormous challenge. The tolerances required for machining parts on Earth are already incredibly tight, but achieving that level of precision with lunar materials, using potentially autonomous robots in a dusty, low-gravity environment, is a whole new level of difficulty. Furthermore, testing these systems on Earth is not perfectly analogous because we cannot easily simulate the lunar vacuum and its combined effects with temperature extremes and radiation. This means that the first habitats will likely be over-engineered, with significant safety margins, which drives up mass and cost. The consequences of a failure are so absolute that there is little room for error. This pressure differential also complicates simple things like waste management or science experiments that might involve gases or liquids. Any system that interfaces with the outside environment needs to be meticulously designed to prevent accidental venting. Even the plants in a potential lunar greenhouse would need to be in a separately pressurized compartment to contain their humidity and oxygen, which could otherwise be lost to the vacuum. The sound of the habitat is another subtle effect. Without air to carry sound waves, the outside is utterly silent, but inside, every pump whir and every footstep would be a reminder of the thin shell separating order from chaos. As we look to longer-term missions and larger bases, the scalability of these pressure systems becomes a critical issue. Connecting multiple modules together requires complex interlocking tunnels and passageways, each with its own set of seals and airlocks, multiplying the potential points of failure. The need for redundancy means duplicating life support systems and power for each isolated section, again adding mass and complexity. Ultimately, living with the vacuum is about mastering containment. It is a fundamental, non-negotiable requirement that influences every aspect of architectural design, operational procedure, and crew training. The solutions we develop for the Moon, from self-healing materials for seals to rapid emergency response protocols, will be directly applicable to future missions to Mars and beyond. It forces us to become better engineers, to think in terms of ultimate reliability and fail-safe systems. While the vacuum is a relentless adversary, it is also a teacher, showing us exactly what it takes to create a pocket of Earth-like normality in the most hostile of environments. The goal is to make the act of pressurization so reliable, so mundane, that the crew can focus on their work and their lives, trusting implicitly in the shell that protects them. But that trust must be earned through relentless testing, intelligent design, and a deep respect for the silent, empty force that waits just beyond the walls. This challenge is as much about psychology as it is about physics, requiring a crew that is not only technically skilled but also mentally resilient, capable of maintaining vigilance without succumbing to paranoia. In the end, conquering the pressure challenge is what will allow us to truly call the Moon a home, a place where humanity can live and work, surrounded by the void but safe within a bubble of our own making. The path forward involves continuous innovation in materials, science, robotics, and systems engineering, all aimed at achieving that one critical goal, keeping the air in and the vacuum out, day after day, year after year. It is a testament to human ingenuity that we even attempt such a feat, and succeeding will be one of our greatest achievements in space exploration. Keeping that fragile bubble of Earth-like environment intact is only half the battle. The other, perhaps more daunting half, is ensuring that everything needed to sustain it actually gets there. Creating a supply line so long and delicate, it makes any earthly logistics operation seem simple. Think about it. Every single thing, from a spare bolt to a litre of water, initially has to travel from Earth, a journey of over 230,000 miles through the vacuum of space, and the cost of that journey is almost unimaginably high. Sending just 1 kilogram of cargo to the lunar surface can cost hundreds of thousands, even millions, of dollars, which means every single gram is scrutinized, every item is precious, and there is absolutely no room for waste or redundancy in the traditional sense. This isn't like ordering a replacement part online with 2-day shipping. If a critical component fails, you cannot just run to the local hardware store, and a resupply mission might be months away. If it is even scheduled at all, the entire operation dangles from a very thin, very expensive thread that stretches all the way back to our planet. And that thread is vulnerable to 1,000 different points of failure. A rocket launch, the very beginning of this fragile umbilical cord, is a notoriously risky endeavour, Despite all our advances, there is always a chance of a catastrophic failure during ascent, turning a vital cargo of food, oxygen, and spare parts into a cloud of debris over the ocean. Even if the launch is successful, it can be delayed for weeks or months by something as simple as bad weather at the launch site, a technical glitch, or a range conflict. And back on the moon, the crew would be watching their supplies dwindle, forced to implement strict rationing long before the new shipment arrives. This creates a constant, low-level anxiety for mission controllers and the crew alike. You are always living on the edge, knowing that your safety margin is thin and that a single missed shipment could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The problem is compounded by the sheer distance. The moon is, on average, about a 3-day journey away, but that is just travel time. The planning, manufacturing, and integration for a resupply mission take years, meaning the supply chain is incredibly inflexible and cannot quickly respond to an unexpected need. If a new type of tool is required for an emergency repair, or if a medical emergency demands a specific drug not in the initial inventory, there is simply no way to get it there quickly. This forces the base design to be incredibly robust, and for the crew to be jacks of all trades, capable of fixing anything with whatever is on hand. But even the most skilled engineer cannot fabricate a complex microchip from scrap metal. The inventory management system would need to be perfect, tracking every single item with extreme precision, and even then, the just-in-case items that you hope never to use take up valuable mass and volume that could be used for other things. This high cost and high risk mean that the initial bases will be small and Spartan, with crews living a very minimalist existence, constantly recycling and reusing everything possible. Water will be purified and drunk again and again. Oxygen will be extracted from recycled carbon dioxide. And food waste might even be composted or processed to recover nutrients. But even with the most advanced closed-loop life support systems, there will be losses. And those losses need to be topped up from Earth. This is why the concept of in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, is not just a cool science project. It is an absolute necessity for any long-term presence. The goal is to break that fragile umbilical cord by learning to live off the land, using the resources the moon itself provides. The most critical resource is water. If we can find and extract water ice from the permanently shadowed craters at the poles, it would be a game changer. Water is not just for drinking. It can be split into hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel and breathable air, dramatically reducing the need to ship these heavy commodities from Earth. Imagine a future where lunar bases produce their own fuel, meaning spacecraft could refuel on the moon, making it a gas station for deeper space exploration. But accessing that water is its own immense challenge, requiring robotic miners to operate in perpetual darkness and temperatures colder than anywhere on Earth, and then developing the infrastructure to store and process it. Beyond water, the regolith itself could be a resource. Experiments are already underway to use lunar soil, or regolith, for three-dimensional printing of structures, creating habitats and radiation shields without having to launch bricks and mortar from Earth. The soil could also be processed to extract metals like aluminum and iron, and oxygen locked in the minerals, which could be used for life support or manufacturing. Developing this capability is a slow, step-by-step process that will require autonomous robots and sophisticated processing plants, all of which have to be shipped from Earth first, creating a paradoxical initial hurdle. The economic model for all of this is also shaky. Who is going to pay for these incredibly expensive supply missions before the base becomes self-sustaining? Government space agencies might fund the initial phases, but for a truly permanent presence, there needs to be an economic reason, like mining rare isotopes for fusion power or supporting a space tourism industry. But these are still speculative. The psychological impact on the crew is another factor. Knowing that your survival depends on a chain of events that you have zero control over, happening 250,000 miles away, can be a heavy mental burden. A delayed shipment is not just an inconvenience, it is a direct threat to your life. And that kind of stress can wear down even the most resilient individuals over time. Furthermore, the storage of all these supplies on the moon is a problem in itself. You need secure, pressurized warehouses that are protected from radiation and temperature extremes, which adds another layer of complexity and cost to the base design. The entire endeavour is a delicate balancing act between minimizing initial mass and ensuring long-term sustainability. Every decision, from the design of a tool to the choice of a food item, is made with this mass budget in mind. It is a world where efficiency is not just a goal, but a matter of survival. As we look to the future, the development of a reliable, cost-effective supply chain, perhaps involving reusable landers and orbital depots, is essential. But until we master the art of living off the land on the moon, our presence there will always be precarious. A tentative outpost entirely dependent on the kindness and capability of a world far, far away. This logistical challenge is perhaps the most fundamental of all because it underpins every other system without a steady flow of supplies. The best habitat, the most advanced power system, and the hardiest crew will eventually fail. The path to breaking that fragile cord is long and fraught with difficulty, but it is the only way to ensure that humanity's return to the moon is not just a series of visits, but the beginning of a permanent home. It requires a shift in mindset from being visitors who bring everything with them to being residents who use what they find. And that shift is one of the most significant transitions in the history of exploration. We are learning, one expensive shipment at a time, how to sever the umbilical cord and stand on our own 2 feet on another world. And that lesson is invaluable for our future as a spacefaring civilization. The logistics are a nightmare, but they are a nightmare we must conquer. But even if we master the logistics and ensure a steady flow of physical supplies, there remains a profound and deeply human challenge that no amount of shipped cargo can fully solve. The psychological weight of living in a confined, isolated, and inherently stressful environment far from home. Imagine being sealed inside a can, a relatively tiny habitat, with the same handful of people for months or even years, with no easy way out, no quick return to family, and the constant, underlying knowledge that a single mistake could mean death. This is the reality for a lunar base crew, and the mental and emotional strain this places on individuals and the group as a whole is one of the most significant hurdles to long-term habitation. The space itself is incredibly limited. Every square metre is precious and multi-purpose, meaning personal space is virtually non-existent. You are always within earshot and eyesight of your crewmates, with little opportunity for genuine solitude or privacy, which can be exhausting for even the most extroverted person. This lack of personal retreat can lead to irritability and tension, as small habits or quirks that might be amusing at first become grating sources of annoyance over time. Compounding this is the extreme isolation. They are not just far from home, they are on another world, separated from Earth by 250,000 miles of empty space. They cannot see their loved ones in person, cannot feel the sun on their skin or the wind in their hair, and are cut off from the vibrant, changing tapestry of life on Earth. The communication with home, while possible, is not instantaneous. There is a delay of several seconds each way, making a normal, flowing conversation impossible. This lag means that during a crisis, or even just a moment of personal distress, they cannot receive immediate comfort or advice from mission control or family. They are, for all practical purposes, on their own. This self-reliance is empowering in some ways, but it also adds a layer of psychological burden, knowing that help is not just a phone call away. The environment outside is hostile and unchanging. The landscape is static, grey, and barren, offering little visual stimulation or variety. Inside, the routine can become monotonous. The same tasks, the same food, the same faces, the same walls, day after day after day. This monotony can lead to a state of mental fatigue and apathy, where motivation drops and performance suffers. The workload, meanwhile, is often intense and unrelenting, with scientific experiments, maintenance chores, and physical exercise regimens filling every waking hour, leaving little time for pure relaxation or leisure. This combination of high stress, sensory deprivation, and social confinement is a perfect recipe for psychological issues like depression, anxiety, and sleep disorders. Perhaps the most dangerous outcome is the potential for interpersonal conflict. In such a small group, a single disagreement or personality clash can escalate and poison the entire social atmosphere, compromising teamwork and cooperation, which are essential for survival. A hostile work environment in an office on Earth is bad enough, but in a lunar base, it could directly lead to mission failure or even tragedy if crew members are unwilling or unable to work together effectively in an emergency. Therefore, the selection process for such a mission is absolutely critical. It is not enough to be a brilliant scientist or a skilled engineer. Astronauts must possess exceptional psychological resilience, emotional stability, and strong interpersonal skills. They need to be team players, able to communicate openly, resolve conflicts constructively, and provide mutual support under pressure. The training for this aspect is extensive, involving long-duration simulations in analog environments on Earth, such as underwater habitats or remote Antarctic stations, where crews are pushed to their limits to see how they handle stress and group dynamics. These simulations help identify potential issues and train individuals in techniques for managing their own mental health and supporting their crewmates. Once on the Moon, the habitat design itself can play a huge role in mitigating these psychological challenges. Architects and psychologists work together to create spaces that feel less claustrophobic and more like a home. This includes designing for privacy, even if it is just a small, personal nook with a door that closes, where an individual can retreat to read, listen to music, or simply be alone with their thoughts. Common areas are designed to be welcoming and multifunctional, serving as places for communal meals, socializing, and group activities to build camaraderie. Recreation is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Habitats might include a dedicated gym for exercise, which is crucial for both physical and mental health, as well as areas for games, movies, or hobbies. One of the most powerful tools to combat the feeling of isolation is the use of technology to maintain a connection to Earth. High-definition video calls with family, even with the delay, can provide a vital emotional lifeline. Virtual reality systems could offer windows showing real-time views of Earth, with forests, oceans, and cities, or even simulated environments to provide a mental escape from the grey lunar landscape. Access to a rich digital library of books, music, films, and courses can help fight boredom and provide intellectual stimulation. The work schedule itself must be carefully designed to include adequate off-duty time and ensure a healthy work-life balance, even in space. Regular psychological support from professionals on Earth, via delayed communication, is also essential, providing a confidential outlet for discussing problems and receiving guidance. Crews might also be trained in mindfulness, meditation, or other stress management techniques to help them maintain their emotional equilibrium. Another factor is the mission duration. Shorter rotations might be easier to handle psychologically than multi-year stays, so carefully planning the length of assignments is important. The role of the commander is crucial in maintaining group morale and addressing issues before they escalate. They need to be not just a leader, but also a facilitator, a mediator, and a confidant. Ultimately, the success of a lunar base depends as much on the mental fortitude of its inhabitants as it does on the technology that keeps them alive. It is about creating a society in a can, a functional, supportive community that can withstand the unique pressures of extreme isolation. The lessons learned from this will be invaluable for the even longer and more isolated missions to Mars and beyond. By prioritizing psychological health alongside physical health, we can ensure that our explorers not only survive but thrive, turning a hostile outpost into a true home away from home. This human element is what transforms a construction project into a community, and it requires continuous attention, research, and empathy. We are learning that to conquer space, we must first understand and nurture the human mind, proving that our greatest strength in exploration is not just our technology, but our humanity. The psychological challenge is a quiet one, often overlooked in flashy presentations about rockets and habitats, but it is every bit as real and demanding as any engineering problem. Addressing it effectively means selecting the right people, designing the right environment, and fostering the right culture of support and resilience. This holistic approach is the key to unlocking long-term human presence in space, ensuring that our journeys outward are undertaken by healthy, happy, and whole individuals. The mind, after all, is the final frontier in space exploration, and caring for it is our most important mission. While keeping the crew psychologically sound is paramount, their physical survival and the very feasibility of the base hinge on a resource we often take for granted on Earth: water. This isn't just about having enough to drink. Water is the absolute linchpin for any long-term lunar ambition, serving as the foundation for life support, agriculture, and perhaps most importantly, as the source of rocket fuel, making the Moon a potential gas station for the solar system. The hunt for this liquid gold focuses on the Moon's poles, specifically inside deep craters that have been permanently shadowed for billions of years, where temperatures plummet to levels colder than anywhere on Earth, preserving water ice delivered by comets over eons. Confirming the exact amount, purity, and accessibility of this ice is still an ongoing process, with orbital data giving us promising hints, but leaving many questions unanswered, making it a moving target that requires boots on the ground, or rather, wheels on the regolith, to fully characterize. Accessing these deposits is a monumental engineering challenge in itself. These craters are realms of perpetual darkness and profound cold, where sunlight never reaches, and any mining equipment must operate reliably in conditions that would cripple most earthly machinery. This means developing robust, autonomous robotic prospectors and miners that can function for extended periods in pitch blackness and extreme cold, using onboard power sources like nuclear batteries, since solar panels are useless in the permanent night. These robots would need to be capable of drilling, excavating, and handling the icy regolith, which is likely a hard, compact mixture of dirt and ice, all while communicating with a base that might be many kilometers away on a sunlit rim. Once extracted, the raw, icy material must be processed to separate the water from the lunar soil, which could involve heating it to sublime the ice directly into vapor, which is then captured and condensed back into liquid. This purification step is critical because the water ice is probably contaminated with other volatile compounds and toxic substances, so it must be meticulously cleaned to make it safe for human consumption and for use in life support systems. Storing this precious liquid once we have it presents another set of vacuum-related headaches. Water left in an unsealed container would rapidly boil away and be lost to space, so all storage tanks must be perfectly sealed and pressurized. And the entire water management system must be designed with multiple redundancies to prevent any catastrophic leaks. The sheer mass of water needed for a sustainable base is staggering when you consider all its uses. It is not just for drinking and hygiene, but it is also split into hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis, providing breathable air for the crew and highly efficient propellant for landing and ascent vehicles. This ability to create fuel on the Moon is a game changer, potentially reducing the cost of deep space missions by an order of magnitude, as spacecraft could refuel there instead of carrying all the propellant from Earth's deep gravity well. However, Establishing this entire extraction and processing infrastructure from scratch is a colossal undertaking that requires significant upfront investment and technological development, and it will likely take many years and several robotic missions before the first drop of lunar water is converted into fuel. In the meantime, the base will remain utterly dependent on water shipments from Earth, which, as we discussed, is an expensive and fragile supply chain, underscoring why in situ water resource utilization is so desperately needed. Beyond fuel and air, water is also essential for any serious attempt at lunar agriculture. Growing food in hydroponic or aeroponic systems requires water, and while these systems recycle most of it, there are always losses that need to be topped up. This connects back to the psychological health of the crew. A small greenhouse or garden providing fresh vegetables would be a massive morale booster, offering a tangible connection to Earth and a break from the monotony of pre-packaged meals. But it cannot exist without a reliable water source. Therefore, developing a nearly closed-loop water recycling system within the habitat itself is absolutely vital, building upon the technology used on the International Space Station, but making it far more efficient and reliable for long-duration missions. On the ISS, about 90% of water is recycled from urine and humidity in the air. On the Moon, that number needs to be closer to 98 or 99% to truly minimize resupply needs. This means advanced filtration systems, chemical processes, and likely biological treatment methods to recover every possible molecule of water from waste streams. Any failure in this recycling system would force an immediate reliance on the mined water reserves or emergency shipments from Earth, so reliability and easy maintenance are key design criteria. The entire water management strategy must be holistic, integrating the mining operations, the storage facilities, the recycling plant, and the consumption points into a single, seamless network that can be monitored and controlled with precision. This also involves training the crew to be expert plumbers and chemists, capable of diagnosing and fixing problems in the water system quickly, as waiting for a repair manual from Earth is not an option. The location of the base is therefore heavily influenced by the proximity to these suspected water ice deposits. Setting up shop near a permanently shadowed crater might offer easy access to water, but would come with its own challenges, like the lack of sunlight for power and the extreme cold. So a balance must be struck, perhaps on a nearby peak of eternal light, where solar power is nearly continuous. The legal and ethical dimensions of water extraction also loom large. If water is indeed concentrated in specific craters, who has the right to mine it? This could become a point of international tension if not governed by clear agreements, turning a scientific endeavour into a political issue. Economically, the business case for a lunar base improves dramatically if water-based propellant production becomes a reality, enabling a cislunar economy where the Moon serves as a hub for refueling and support. The technological spin-offs from solving these water challenges on the Moon will have applications on Earth, particularly in areas of water purification and conservation in arid regions. In essence, mastering the water cycle on the Moon is the single most important step toward true self-sufficiency and the long-term goal of making humanity a multi-planetary species. It is a complex puzzle involving robotics, chemistry, engineering, and human factors, but solving it will unlock the solar system, turning the Moon from a destination into a springboard. Every aspect of the base, from the power systems needed to run the water miners to the psychological benefits of a stable water supply, is interconnected, demonstrating that in space, everything comes back to the most fundamental resources. The quest for lunar water is not just a scientific mission, it is the key to unlocking a future where humanity thrives beyond Earth, making it a challenge worth every ounce of effort and innovation we can muster. The path is difficult, but the reward is nothing less than a permanent foothold on another world, sustained by the most precious resource of all, after securing a reliable water source. The next monumental hurdle we face is powering the entire operation, a challenge that becomes terrifyingly clear when you realize that for 14 straight Earth days, the base is plunged into absolute darkness and cold, cutting off the most obvious energy source we have. The sun simply vanishes for 2 weeks, and with it, any direct solar power, forcing us to engineer a way to survive the long lunar night without freezing, suffocating, or seeing all our systems fail. This isn't just about keeping the lights on, it is about maintaining life support, running computers, conducting experiments, and keeping communication lines open to Earth, all while the environment outside becomes inhospitable in the extreme. The core of the problem lies in the moon's rotation and lack of atmosphere. A day on the moon from sunrise to sunrise lasts about 28 Earth days, meaning 14 days of continuous sunlight followed by 14 days of continuous darkness. During the day, solar panels can generate abundant power, but that energy must either be used immediately, stored incredibly efficiently, or supplemented by another source that works independently of the sun. Relying solely on solar power with batteries for storage is the first idea that comes to mind. But the scale of battery capacity needed to bridge a 2-week gap is staggering. Imagine the largest batteries you can think of on Earth, then multiply that by 100, and you are still probably underestimating the mass and volume required. Launching that much battery mass from Earth would be prohibitively expensive and likely impossible with current rocket technology, as every kilogram costs a fortune. Even the most advanced lithium-ion batteries have limited energy density, and they degrade over time, losing capacity with each charge and discharge cycle, which is a serious problem when you cannot easily replace them. Furthermore, batteries perform poorly in extreme cold. The frigid temperatures of the lunar night could drastically reduce their efficiency or even cause them to fail completely unless they are kept warm, which itself consumes precious energy. This leads to the concept of a hybrid energy system, a combination of sources that work together to ensure uninterrupted power. Solar panels would still be the workhorse during the day, potentially covering vast areas to generate a surplus that can be used for immediate needs and for charging the backup systems. But for the night, we need something far more robust and independent. One of the most promising solutions is nuclear fission power. Compact nuclear reactors designed for space use can provide a steady, reliable source of heat and electricity regardless of the time of day or weather conditions. These reactors are not like the massive power plants on Earth. They are small, sealed units that use the heat from splitting atoms to generate electricity, and they can run for years without refueling. The technology has been tested and is considered mature for space applications, with prototypes already developed. However, launching a nuclear reactor into space carries its own set of risks and public perception challenges. Any failure during launch could spread radioactive material, and there are political and safety protocols that must be rigorously followed. Once on the moon, the reactor would need to be placed at a safe distance from the habitat to minimize radiation exposure to the crew, but close enough to efficiently transmit power, likely through cables. Another option is to use radioisotope thermoelectric generators, which are simpler and have been used on deep space probes, but they provide less power and might only be suitable for small, critical systems rather than an entire base. Beyond nuclear, there are innovative ideas like using the temperature difference between the surface and the subsurface. During the lunar day, the surface gets incredibly hot, while just a meter or two underground, the temperature remains relatively stable and cool. A heat engine could theoretically exploit this gradient to generate electricity, but the efficiency of such systems is currently low, and the technology is still in early research stages. Another concept involves storing energy in a different form, such as thermal energy. Excess solar power from the day could be used to heat up a substance, like molten salt, which has excellent heat retention properties. This hot reservoir would then slowly release its heat during the night, which could be converted into electricity via a turbine or used directly for heating the habitat. This method is being explored for concentrated solar power on Earth and could be adapted for the Moon. but it requires complex machinery and introduces moving parts that could fail. The choice of energy system directly impacts how the base operates. During the night, to conserve power, the base might enter a low-power hibernation mode. Non-essential experiments would be paused, lighting would be dimmed, and the crew's activities would be scaled back significantly. This is not ideal for productivity or morale, as living in a dim, cold base for 2 weeks at a time could be psychologically draining, even with the best preparations. Therefore, ensuring a constant and stable energy supply is not just a technical issue, but a human one as well. The reliability of the power system is absolutely critical. A single failure during the long night could lead to a rapid drop in temperature, freezing water lines, disabling life support, and cutting off communications, creating a life-threatening situation within hours. Redundancy is key, meaning multiple independent power sources and backup systems must be in place. For example, the base might have a primary nuclear reactor, a secondary battery bank for short-term outages, and perhaps a set of fuel cells that can be activated in an emergency. All these systems need to be monitored and maintained by the crew, who must be trained to handle power failures and perform repairs with limited resources. The infrastructure for power distribution also adds complexity. Wiring, transformers, and power management systems must all be designed to withstand the extreme thermal cycling, radiation, and dust, which can cause corrosion and short circuits. The location of the base plays a role too, setting up near the poles, where some areas have almost constant sunlight on high ridges, could reduce the night duration problem, but these peaks of eternal light are rare and might not be near other resources like water ice. The economic cost of developing and deploying these power systems is enormous, and it is a major factor in the overall budget of any lunar mission. International collaboration might be necessary to share the financial burden and technical expertise. Looking ahead, the energy solutions we pioneer on the Moon will be directly applicable to future missions to Mars, where the day-night cycle is about 24 hours, but dust storms can block the sun for weeks, presenting a similar challenge. Mastering lunar energy is therefore a stepping stone to deeper space exploration. It requires a blend of proven technology and bold innovation, pushing the boundaries of what is possible in power generation and storage. In the end, solving the energy enigma is about granting the base independence from the cycles of the sun, allowing humanity to establish a permanent, thriving presence on the Moon, no matter how long the night lasts. This effort will not only enable lunar habitation, but also drive advancements in energy technology that could benefit Earth, such as more efficient batteries and safer nuclear power. The path is lit by the need to overcome darkness, and with every watt of power we generate, we move closer to making the Moon a second home for humanity. The challenge is immense, but so is the potential reward, fueling our journey to the stars. Even with all the power and water secured, the most fragile and complex system we have to maintain on the Moon is the human body itself, and the practice of medicine in such an isolated and hostile environment presents a terrifying array of unknowns and emergencies for which there are no simple answers. We are not just talking about scrapes and bruises. We are talking about the potential for a medical crisis that would be routine on Earth, but becomes a life or death situation when you are 250,000 miles away from the nearest hospital. The first and most pervasive issue is the long-term effect of the Moon's low gravity, which is only 1/6 of what we experience on Earth. While this might seem like fun, allowing for giant leaps, it has profound consequences for human physiology that we are only beginning to understand. On the International Space Station, in microgravity, we have documented extensive changes. Fluids shift towards the head, causing puffiness in the face and congestion, while bones and muscles, no longer needing to fight gravity, begin to deteriorate rapidly. Astronauts can lose up to 1 to 2% of their bone density per month, particularly in weight-bearing areas like the hips and legs. and their muscles atrophy despite a rigorous daily exercise regimen. The big question for the Moon is whether 1/6 gravity is enough to mitigate these effects. Will it be sufficient stimulus to tell the body, hey, Dot, we still need some bone and muscle here? Or will the decay simply happen at a slower, but still dangerous, rate? The truth is, we do not know for sure. This is a completely new physiological environment, and a multi-year stay on the Moon could reveal health problems we have never anticipated, from vision changes caused by that persistent fluid shift to issues with balance and the vestibular system that make it difficult to walk upon returning to Earth. Now, layer on top of that the constant threat of a medical emergency. What happens if an astronaut develops acute appendicitis, or a severe kidney infection, or suffers a serious injury during a construction project? On Earth, these are solved with a quick trip to an emergency room and surgery if needed. On the Moon, evacuation is not an option. The journey back to Earth takes days, and a patient in critical condition would not survive it. This means the base must essentially have its own miniature hospital, and at least 1 or 2 members of the crew must have advanced medical training far beyond basic first aid. We are talking about field surgeon level skills, capable of performing emergency procedures like an appendectomy or managing complex trauma, all while potentially being guided by instructions from Earth with a several-second delay. The equipment needed for this is another massive logistical challenge. An ultrasound machine, a compact X-ray device, a full suite of surgical tools, anesthetics, and a comprehensive pharmacy all represent significant mass and volume that must be launched and maintained. And what if the doctor is the one who gets sick? The entire crew must be cross-trained to assist in major medical procedures. The risk of infection in a closed-loop environment is also heightened. On Earth, our immune systems are constantly being challenged and calibrated by exposure to a myriad of harmless microbes. In the sterile, isolated environment of a lunar base, the immune system can become lazy or dysregulated. Then, if a pathogen is introduced, perhaps from a new shipment of supplies or from a crew member, it could spread rapidly through the entire habitat with devastating consequences. A simple case of the flu, which is manageable on Earth, could incapacitate the entire crew and overwhelm the life support system with fever and other symptoms. Furthermore, radiation exposure, as we discussed earlier, does not just increase cancer risk, it can also weaken the immune system, making astronauts more susceptible to illness. This creates a perfect storm where the body's defences are down just as the risk of contagion is up. Dental emergencies are another hidden nightmare. A severe tooth abscess or a cracked tooth could be excruciatingly painful and lead to a systemic infection if not treated properly, requiring dental skills and tools that may not be available. The concept of telemedicine, where doctors on Earth guide the crew through procedures, is helpful but limited by that communication delay. For a real-time, delicate procedure like surgery, a delay of even a few seconds can be catastrophic, as the remote doctor cannot see the immediate consequences of their instructions or feel the tissue resistance. This necessitates a high degree of autonomy for the crew medical officer. The psychological stress of the environment also has direct physical manifestations, including sleep disorders, elevated cortisol levels, and digestive issues, which can all compound existing medical problems. The pharmacy must be extensive, but medications can degrade over time due to radiation exposure, and their effects on the human body can be altered in low gravity, meaning dosages and efficacy are not fully understood. The entire approach to lunar medicine must be proactive, not reactive. This means continuous health monitoring with wearable sensors that track vital signs, sleep patterns, and even radiation exposure, feeding this data to both the crew and mission control for analysis. Regular medical drills are essential to keep skills sharp for when a real emergency strikes. The design of the habitat must include a dedicated, well-lit, an impeccably clean medical bay that can be isolated from the rest of the living quarters in case of contagion. Ultimately, the goal is to create a medical capability that is as self-sufficient as the rest of the base. But this is arguably the most difficult system to make autonomous because of the infinite complexity of the human body. The lessons learned from providing healthcare on the moon will directly inform how we prepare for the much longer journey to Mars, where evacuation is utterly impossible. It forces us to confront the very real physical vulnerabilities of human explorers and to develop the technology and protocols to protect them. This is not just about engineering. It is about biomedical innovation, about creating compact, intelligent diagnostic tools, and perhaps even about using three-dimensional printing to create custom surgical guides or medical devices on demand. The success of a lunar base will depend as much on the health of its crew as on the reliability of its power supply, making medicine in a vacuum one of the most human-centric and critical challenges of them all. It requires a new kind of explorer, one who is not only an engineer or a scientist, but also a capable medic, ready to be the sole provider of care in a world where no one else can come to help. This immense responsibility underscores the fact that we are not just building a base, we are building a community, and the health of that community is its most valuable asset. After confronting the terrifying realities of medical emergencies in isolation, we now face a challenge that compounds every other risk, the fundamental disconnect in communication, where even a cry for help takes seconds to be heard, and the answer just as long to return, making every decision a solitary one. This isn't just about poor phone service. It is about the immutable laws of physics that dictate a delay of about 1.3 seconds for a signal to travel each way between the Earth and the Moon, meaning a simple question and answer exchange has a built-in lag of over 2.5 seconds. That might not sound like much when you are sending an email, but in a high-stakes environment where milliseconds matter, that delay is an eternity. Imagine trying to remotely control a rover in real time to perform a delicate repair on a critical life support system outside the habitat. You command it to move forward, and you wait, watching the screen for over a second before it even begins to respond. And then you see the result, another second later. This makes fine manipulation, like using a robotic arm to connect a cable or drill into a rock sample, incredibly difficult and frustrating, requiring a move and wait strategy that slows operations to a crawl. Now, amplify that to a genuine emergency, like a habitat leak or a crew member in medical distress. The astronauts on the moon are truly on their own for those first critical moments. They cannot have a real-time conversation with mission control to troubleshoot. They describe the situation, wait, receive advice, wait again, and all the while, the clock is ticking and the problem might be escalating. This communication delay forces a radical shift in autonomy. The crew must be trained to handle a vast array of crises without immediate input from Earth, acting as their own first responders, engineers, and doctors. This level of self-reliance is empowering, but also adds an immense psychological burden, knowing that in a pinch, you are your own best and only hope. The delay also affects the very rhythm of daily life and work. Collaborative science experiments between Earth and Moon become stilted, and even casual communication with family feels disconnected and unnatural, exacerbating feelings of isolation. But the delay is only one part of the problem. The other is the simple fact that the Earth does not always stay in view due to the Moon's rotation. Any base not located at a very specific point will eventually lose the direct line of sight to our planet as it moves behind the lunar horizon. For about half of every lunar day, which is 14 Earth days long, a base on the near side might have a clear view, but for the other half, the Earth is absent from the sky, and with it, direct communication. This creates communication blackouts that could last for days at a time, completely severing the link to home and mission control. During these periods, the base is utterly isolated, unable to send or receive any data, not even a simple status update or a call for help. This is obviously unacceptable for a permanent, occupied base. So the solution is to build a lunar internet, a network of satellites in orbit around the moon that can relay signals. Think of it as a lunar GPS and communication system combined, where multiple satellites ensure that at least one is always in view of both the base and the Earth, providing constant coverage. This infrastructure is an absolute prerequisite, something that must be established before we can even think about sending long-term crews. But it represents a massive and separate investment of billions of dollars and years of development. Designing and launching these satellites is a huge undertaking. They must withstand the radiation environment, the thermal extremes of lunar orbit, and operate reliably for years without easy maintenance. They need powerful transmitters and receivers to handle the data load from the base, including high-definition video, scientific data, and telemetry, all while coordinating with each other and ground stations on Earth. The architecture of this network is complex, likely involving a combination of satellites in different orbits to ensure no single point of failure. But even with a robust network, the delay remains. The satellites reduce blackouts but do nothing to shorten the light speed travel time. Furthermore, this system introduces new vulnerabilities. If a key satellite fails, or if there is a software glitch in the network, large portions of the lunar surface could be plunged back into communication darkness. A coordinated cyber attack on this system, though a grim thought, is a potential threat that must be guarded against. The consequences of a prolonged communications failure are dire. The base would be cut off from navigation data for landing spacecraft, from software updates for their systems, from real-time medical consultation, and from the morale-boosting contact with loved ones. This isolation could lead to poor decision-making under stress and a heightened sense of vulnerability. The need for this communication backbone also influences where we place the base. A location near the lunar poles might offer advantages for water and power, but it could have unique communication challenges that require more satellites for coverage. The cost of building, launching, and maintaining this network is so high that it will likely require an international consortium to fund and manage, raising questions about governance and access. Who controls the lunar internet? Is it a neutral utility, or can access be restricted for political or commercial reasons? These are questions that need answers before the first module is landed. Moreover, the data bandwidth is a precious resource, with multiple bases, rovers, and orbiters all trying to communicate. Prioritizing traffic becomes crucial. Scientific data might have to be queued behind emergency communications, and video calls might be limited to conserve bandwidth. The development of efficient data compression protocols is essential to make the most of the available link. For the astronauts, living with this delayed and sometimes intermittent connection requires a mental adjustment. They must learn to think and act more independently, to document their actions thoroughly for later review, and to develop protocols for operating during blackout periods. This communication reality fundamentally shapes the culture of the lunar base, fostering a spirit of self-sufficiency and collective responsibility that is unlike anything on Earth. The lessons learned from establishing and operating this lunar comms network will be directly applicable to future missions to Mars, where the delays stretch to minutes and the isolation is even more profound. In many ways, mastering the art of communication around the moon is the first step in learning how to live and work effectively in the deeply disconnected environment of interplanetary space. It is a test of our ability to create resilient, autonomous communities far from home, proving that we can maintain the thread of connection even across vast distances, not in real time, but in a way that still binds us together as a species. The challenge is not just technological. It is about adapting human behavior and expectations to the harsh realities of physics, building a society that can thrive even when the home planet is just a delayed voice in the void. This effort will redefine how we communicate as we expand into the solar system, making the lunar communication system a foundational pillar of our spacefaring future. The work to create this network is already underway, with plans for lunar orbiters dedicated to communication and its success will silence the eerie silence that currently dominates the lunar landscape, replacing it with the constant, if delayed, hum of human conversation and data, turning the moon from a silent rock into a connected outpost. But with a reliable communication link finally established, our attention must turn to the most physically monumental task of all, actually building the structures that will house and protect us. And here we face a brutal economic truth that forces us to get creative. Shipping bricks, steel, and concrete from Earth is a financial non-starter. The cost would be astronomical, so we have to learn to become lunar masons, using the only abundant material available, the dusty, problematic regolith that covers the entire surface. This isn't just about piling up dirt, it is about pioneering a completely new field of engineering focused on turning this jagged, abrasive powder into sturdy, reliable buildings that can withstand the moon's harsh environment for decades. The process begins with understanding the material itself. Lunar regolith is not soil. It is a complex mixture of fine dust, glass beads, and mineral fragments, all shaped by eons of meteorite impacts without any weathering to smooth its edges. Its composition varies from place to place, but it is generally rich in silicates, much like the volcanic basalt found on Earth, which gives us clues about how we might work with it. The most promising technology on the horizon is three-dimensional printing, where we use the regolith itself as the printing ink to build up structures layer by layer. But you cannot just extrude mud like on Earth. The regolith has to be fused together into a solid, rock-like material. One method being intensely researched is sintering, where we use a concentrated energy source to heat the dust just enough to make the particles stick together without fully melting them. This can be done with microwaves, which interact with certain minerals in the regolith to generate heat from within, or by using massive lenses or mirrors to focus sunlight into a powerful beam that scans across the dustbed, tracing the pattern of a wall and fusing it into place. Another approach involves using a binder, a chemical agent mixed with the regolith to act as a glue, but that requires shipping the binder from Earth, which partly defeats the purpose of using local materials, so the focus is on methods that use only the regolith and energy. The appeal of three-dimensional printing is its autonomy. Large, robotic printers could be sent ahead of human crews to construct basic habitats, radiation shields, and landing pads autonomously, operating for months to create a ready-made infrastructure. Imagine a rover that slowly crawls across the landscape, scooping up regolith and printing a continuous dome-shaped habitat behind it, all while being supervised from Earth. However, the road to making this work is filled with enormous technical hurdles. We do not fully understand how sintered regolith behaves under the unique stresses of the lunar environment. How does a wall made of fused regolith handle the constant brutal thermal cycling between scorching days and freezing nights? The expansion and contraction could cause cracks to form over time, compromising the structural integrity. How does it hold up under the relentless bombardment of micrometeorites? A small impact might chip the surface, but a larger one could cause significant damage, so we need to know how these materials fracture. Furthermore, the properties of the regolith can change depending on where you are on the moon. The dust at the poles, which may contain water ice, will behave very differently when heated than the dry regolith from the equatorial regions. This means we cannot have a one-size-fits-all recipe. The construction robots will need to be smart enough to analyze the local material and adjust their printing parameters on the fly. Another major challenge is the dust itself. The act of excavating, moving, and processing regolith will kick up huge amounts of this abrasive, clingy dust, which could jam the delicate mechanisms of the printers and coat solar panels. So the entire construction site needs to be designed with dust mitigation in mind, perhaps using electrostatic curtains or water sprays to suppress the dust. But water is far too precious to waste. The sheer scale of material needed is also daunting. To provide adequate protection against radiation and micrometeorites, habitats will likely need to be buried under several meters of regolith, which means we have to move massive amounts of dirt. This requires powerful excavation equipment that can operate in low gravity and a vacuum, which again must be incredibly reliable because there are no mechanics on standby. The development of this technology is happening right now in labs on Earth, where scientists create simulants of lunar regolith and test various printing and sintering techniques in vacuum chambers that mimic the lunar environment. They are studying the strength, durability, and thermal properties of the resulting materials, trying to predict how they will perform over years. But there is only so much we can learn on Earth. Ultimately, we need to test these technologies on the Moon itself, with small-scale demonstrations before we commit to building an entire base. The importance of getting this right cannot be overstated. A well-constructed regolith habitat is our best bet for protection from galactic cosmic rays and solar particle events, as the thick walls act as a shield, absorbing the radiation before it can reach the crew. It also provides excellent insulation against the temperature extremes and a robust barrier against micrometeorite impacts. This approach transforms a major problem, the hazardous dust, into the primary solution for survival. Beyond habitats, we can use sintered regolith to create roads, landing pads to prevent rocket exhaust from blasting dust everywhere, and even storage facilities. The long-term vision is a self-sufficient construction industry on the Moon, where almost everything is built from local materials, drastically reducing our dependence on Earth and making the base truly sustainable. This endeavour is not just about engineering, it is about adapting our building codes, our safety standards, and our very understanding of construction to a world with 1/6 the gravity, no atmosphere, and a foundation of alien dust. It requires a collaboration between roboticists, materials, scientists, geologists, and architects, all working together to invent the future of off-world living. The lessons we learn from building with regolith on the Moon will be directly applicable to Mars and other destinations where similar challenges await. As we master this science, we move from being visitors who bring their own shelter to becoming residents who shape their environment from the ground up. Literally, this is the essence of becoming a spacefaring civilization, learning to live off the land no matter how foreign that land may be. The path is dusty and difficult, but each printed block brings us closer to a permanent home on the Moon, a testament to human ingenuity and our relentless drive to build, even in the most unforgiving of environments. The success of this construction revolution will determine whether our presence on the Moon is a fleeting chapter or the beginning of a new era for humanity, all built from the very ground beneath our feet. But even as we master the art of building sturdy shelters from the lunar soil, a constant, invisible rain of tiny projectiles threatens to undo all our work in an instant. A reminder that the Moon is a shooting gallery with no protective ceiling. These are micrometeoroids, tiny specks of rock and metal, often no larger than a grain of sand, but travelling at speeds so fast they pack a punch far greater than their size would suggest, making them one of the most persistent and dangerous environmental hazards we face. Without any atmosphere to burn them up or slow them down, as happens on Earth with shooting stars, every single one of these particles reaches the lunar surface at hypersonic velocities, some exceeding tens of kilometers per second. When something that small moves that fast, its kinetic energy is immense, and upon impact, it doesn't just bounce off, it vaporizes itself and a small portion of the target material in a tiny, explosive event that can pit, erode, or penetrate whatever it hits. Think of it like being sandblasted, but with bullets instead of sand. And this sandblasting is happening every minute of every day, from every direction. The cumulative effect of this bombardment is what has given the Moon its fine, powdery regolith over billions of years. But for our human-made equipment, it presents an immediate and operational nightmare. Solar panels, which are critical for power, have large, fragile surfaces that are extremely vulnerable to this kind of damage. A single impact can shatter a solar cell, creating a dead spot and reducing power output, while a hail of impacts over time can cloud and scratch the protective glass, significantly degrading their efficiency. This means power systems need redundant capacity and easily replaceable panels, adding to the mass and complexity of the base. The outer shells of habitats and modules are also prime targets. While a micrometeoroid might be too small to cause a catastrophic hole on its own, it can weaken the structural integrity over time, creating stress points that could fail under other pressures, like thermal cycling or a slightly larger impact. But the real nightmare scenario, the one that keeps engineers awake at night, is the possibility of an impact on a pressurized module. The hull of a habitat is under constant stress from the internal air pressure, and a puncture from a micrometeoroid, even a tiny one, could lead to a rapid depressurization. The air would rush out into the vacuum in a violent, screaming jet, and depending on the size of the hole, the module could lose its breathable atmosphere in minutes or even seconds. This isn't a slow leak, it's a catastrophic event that would require immediate emergency action from the crew. Spacesuits are equally vulnerable during extravehicular activities. A puncture in a suit could be fatal for an astronaut in a matter of moments, as their oxygen supply escapes and they are exposed to the vacuum. This ever-present risk means that every spacewalk is a calculated gamble, and the design of suits must include multiple layers of protective material and perhaps even self-sealing technologies to handle small punctures. So, how do we protect ourselves from this invisible shotgun blast? The primary strategy is shielding, and it borrows a page from the construction techniques we just developed. The most effective and straightforward method is to bury the habitats under a thick layer of regolith. This lunar soil acts as a superb bumper, absorbing the energy of incoming particles. When a micrometeoroid hits this layer, it vaporizes upon impact, and the resulting debris is stopped by the surrounding material. Several meters of regolith can provide excellent protection, not just from micrometeoroids, but also from radiation, making it a multi-purpose solution. This is why the concept of building habitats underground or covering them with excavated soil is so attractive. Another approach is to design the habitats with Whipple shields, a concept used on spacecraft like the International Space Station. This involves having a double wall. The outer wall, or bumper, dot, is designed to be hit first. It shatters the incoming particle into a cloud of even smaller, slower moving fragments and vapour, which then spreads out and impacts the inner wall over a larger area. This inner wall, now facing a distributed load rather than a single high-energy point impact, can withstand the force much more easily without being punctured. This kind of design is crucial for any module that cannot be buried, such as connecting nodes or airlocks. However, all shielding adds mass, and mass is the enemy when launching from Earth, which is another reason why using local regolith for protection is so economically compelling. Beyond passive shielding, we need active systems to monitor this threat. This means installing networks of sensors around the base that can detect impacts, triangulate their location, and alert the crew to any potential damage. These sensors could be acoustic, listening for the sound of impacts propagating through the habitat structure, or optical, using cameras to detect the flash of light from vaporization upon impact. This data would be fed into a central system that could help pinpoint which part of the habitat might have been compromised, allowing for a rapid response. But monitoring alone isn't enough. We also need robust and rapid repair capabilities. For a small puncture in a habitat, the crew must be trained and equipped with emergency patch kits. These might be like advanced versions of tyre repair kits, with sealants and patches that can be applied from the inside to plug a hole quickly for external damage, such as to a solar panel or a radiator. we might rely on robots or even specialized drones that can be dispatched to assess and perform minor repairs. The goal is to have a response time measured in minutes, not hours, to prevent a small problem from becoming a life-threatening crisis. The constant need for vigilance and repair adds another layer to the daily workload and psychological stress for the crew. They are living in an environment where their home is continuously, silently being tested, and a random, unpredictable event could trigger an emergency at any time. This requires not only physical resilience but also mental preparedness to handle such high-stress situations. Furthermore, the micrometeoroid environment isn't constant. It can vary with meteor showers. When the Earth-Moon system passes through trails of debris left by comets, during these periods, the flux of particles can increase dramatically, necessitating that the crew take extra precautions, perhaps even sheltering in the most heavily shielded part of the base until the shower passes. The long-term sustainability of the base depends on our ability to manage this risk. It influences everything from the architectural layout, placing the most critical systems in the most shielded areas, to the operational protocols, limiting surface activities during known high-risk periods. The technology we develop for micrometeoroid protection on the Moon, from advanced shielding materials to autonomous repair systems, will be directly applicable to future spacecraft travelling to Mars and beyond, where the threat exists in deep space without the option of using planetary soil for protection. In essence, living with micrometeoroids is about accepting a certain level of risk and engineering around it, creating systems that are not only strong but also resilient and repairable. It's a testament to human ingenuity that we can even contemplate making a home in such a hostile environment. And overcoming this challenge is a critical step in proving that we can not only visit but truly live and thrive on worlds beyond our own. The silent reign continues, but with careful planning and robust technology, we can ensure it remains a manageable nuisance rather than a showstopper for lunar exploration. After fortifying our habitats against the relentless hail of space debris, we confront a challenge that strikes at the very heart of long-term survival: the need to grow our own food, transforming a sterile outpost into a self-sustaining home. The dream of a lunar greenhouse is compelling, but the reality is that the ground beneath our feet, the regolith, is perhaps the worst imaginable starting point for a farm. It is not soil, but a barren, abrasive powder, completely devoid of the organic life and nutrients that plants need to thrive. On Earth, soil is a living, breathing ecosystem teeming with bacteria, fungi, and worms that break down organic matter into food for plants. But lunar regolith is a dead material, a product of violent meteoroid impacts that have left it sharp, chemically reactive, and utterly sterile. If you were to simply plant a seed in a pot of this stuff, it would likely fail to germinate. Or if it did, the seedling would struggle, become stunted, and die, as it cannot access the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other essential elements that plants absorb from rich earthly soil. Furthermore, the physical structure of regolith is terrible for plant roots. It lacks the porosity and aeration that allows roots to breathe and spread, and its sharp, glassy particles can actually damage delicate root tissues, preventing water and nutrient uptake. This means that traditional farming, as we know it, is impossible on the Moon without significant and fundamental alteration of the regolith itself. So, how do we overcome this? The most immediate and technologically ready solution is to bypass the regolith entirely through soilless cultivation methods like hydroponics and aeroponics. In hydroponics, period ball plants are grown with their roots suspended in a water-based, nutrient-rich solution, while aeroponics involves misting the roots with a nutrient fog. These methods are highly efficient in terms of water and space, and they have been successfully demonstrated on the International Space Station, providing fresh greens for astronauts. However, they are not a perfect magic bullet for the Moon. Both systems still require a constant supply of water and pre-mixed nutrient solutions. which initially must be imported from Earth, re-establishing that fragile supply chain we are trying to break. They also rely on complex hardware, pumps, pipes, sensors, and lights, all of which consume precious power and are potential points of failure in a system where a pump breakdown could mean the loss of an entire crop. Moreover, these systems do not create a true regenerative ecosystem. They are more like a life support machine for plants, requiring constant input and monitoring. Therefore, while hydroponics and aeroponics will almost certainly be part of the initial lunar food production, scientists are passionately researching a more permanent and elegant solution, actually turning the regolith into something resembling soil. This process, called bioremediation or soil synthesis, involves charging the sterile regolith with the ingredients for life. The first step is to add organic matter. This could come from the crew's own food waste and other biological waste, composted and processed into a nutrient-rich compost. But the volume of waste from a small crew would be insufficient to create large amounts of soil, so we might need to import initial batches of specific bacteria and fungi that are capable of breaking down the mineral components of the regolith and starting to release trapped nutrients like phosphorus and potassium. Genetically engineered microbes could be designed specifically for this task, to slowly weather the regolith and make its minerals bioavailable. Experiments on Earth using simulants of lunar and Martian soil have shown that when you mix regolith with organic compost, you can eventually create a medium that can support plant growth, though the plants often still show signs of stress from the residual abrasiveness and the presence of heavy metals. Another fascinating avenue of research is the use of worms and insects in a closed-loop system. Earthworms, for instance, could help aerate the regolith compost mixture and break down organic matter further, creating a more robust soil structure over time. The psychological dimension of this agricultural endeavour cannot be overstated. Beyond the sheer necessity of nutrition, a lunar garden represents a profound connection to Earth and a powerful tool for crew well-being. Imagine the morale boost of caring for living plants, watching them grow, and then harvesting and eating a fresh tomato or a leaf of lettuce after months of packaged food. The colour green, so absent on the grey lunar landscape, has a demonstrated calming effect on the human mind. The act of gardening itself provides a sense of purpose, routine, and a comforting reminder of home, helping to combat the feelings of isolation and confinement. It also contributes to the life support system. Plants absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen through photosynthesis, and they can help purify water through transpiration, integrating beautifully into the habitat's recycling loops. However, the path to a thriving lunar farm is paved with practical hurdles. The garden would need to be housed in a dedicated, pressurized module with carefully controlled temperature, humidity, and artificial lighting to simulate a day-night cycle, all of which consumes significant energy. Water management would be critical. Every drop would need to be recycled, and the system would have to be nearly perfectly sealed to prevent water loss to the vacuum outside. Pollination for fruiting plants like tomatoes or strawberries would likely need to be done manually by the crew or by small robotic pollinators, as bringing bees to the moon is a whole other level of complexity. There are also biological containment concerns. What if a plant pathogen or pest somehow contaminates the closed environment? The crew would need to be trained in basic plant pathology and have the tools to manage such outbreaks. The evolution of lunar agriculture will likely be a step-by-step process. It might start with a small hydroponic cabinet growing leafy greens and herbs, then expand to a larger module experimenting with regolith enrichment for root vegetables, and eventually scale up to a full-scale greenhouse producing a significant portion of the crew's dietary needs. The knowledge gained from each step will be invaluable, not just for the moon, but for future missions to Mars, where the soil is different, but the principles of living off the land remain the same. Ultimately, learning to farm on the moon is about more than calories. It is about achieving a deeper level of independence and creating a biosphere that can sustain human life far from our home planet. It is the ultimate expression of turning a hostile world into a home, one seed at a time. The challenges are immense, from the chemical hostility of the regolith to the engineering demands of a space greenhouse. But the reward is a future where lunar bases are not just surviving, but thriving, with the sight and smell of growing plants as a central part of daily life. This endeavour blends the most ancient human practice with the most cutting-edge science, and its success will mark a pivotal moment in our journey as a spacefaring civilization, proving that we can not only live on other worlds, but can also bring a piece of Earth's vitality with us. The work to make barren regolith bloom is already underway in labs around the world, and with each experiment, we learn more about how to nurture life in the most unlikely of places, ensuring that when we return to the moon to stay, we will do so with the ability to feed ourselves and nurture our spirits, creating a true garden in the void. While we learn to make the regolith bloom, we must also confront the profound and lingering question of how the moon's gentle but persistent gravity, just 1/6 of Earth's, will reshape the human body over months and years, creating a physiological experiment with no precedent and potentially permanent consequences. We have extensive data on the effects of microgravity from decades on the International Space Station, where the near-total absence of load leads to rapid muscle atrophy and bone loss, a floating environment that tells the body it no longer needs a strong skeleton or powerful legs. But the moon is different. It presents a third gravitational environment, neither the full load of Earth nor the weightlessness of orbit, but a constant, gentle pull that might be just enough to confuse our biological systems. The central, unnerving question is whether this 1/6 gravity is a sufficient stimulus to maintain human health, or if it represents a slow-motion version of the decay seen in microgravity. Will astronauts living on the moon for a year still lose 1 to 2% of their bone mass per month in their hips and spines? Or will the loss be slower, perhaps 0.5%, but cumulative and just as dangerous over a longer mission? We simply do not know, and the implications are staggering for anyone planning to stay for more than a few weeks. The bones are not just passive scaffolds. They are living tissue that constantly remodels itself based on the stresses placed upon it. Without the regular impact of walking and running on Earth, the cells that build bone become less active, while the cells that break it down continue their work, leading to a net loss of calcium and density, a condition similar to osteoporosis but accelerated dramatically. On the ISS, astronauts combat this with rigorous daily exercise, using advanced resistive machines and treadmills with harnesses, but even this only mitigates the loss. It does not prevent it entirely. On the moon, the exercise regimen will be just as critical, but the equipment must be redesigned for the unique gravity. Running with 1/6, your body weight feels different, and the forces needed to provide adequate resistance for squats or deadlifts must be carefully calibrated to simulate an Earth-like load. Otherwise, the exercise might be insufficient. Beyond the bones, muscles also face a unique challenge. The anti-gravity muscles in our backs, calves, and necks, which constantly work to keep us upright on Earth, will be understimulated, likely leading to weakening and atrophy, while other muscles used for locomotion in low-gravity hopping might develop in strange, new patterns. This could lead to muscular imbalances and chronic pain. The cardiovascular system is another major unknown. In microgravity, fluids shift towards the upper body, causing puffy face and congestion, while the heart, no longer fighting gravity to pump blood upwards, can become deconditioned and lose mass. Will 1/6 gravity be enough to keep these fluids mostly in their proper place and maintain the heart's strength? Or will astronauts still experience fluid shifts, just to a lesser degree, potentially leading to altered blood pressure regulation and orthostatic intolerance, dizziness and fainting upon returning to Earth, or, more critically, upon landing on a higher gravity world like Mars? Perhaps the most concerning unknown is the impact on the brain and sensory systems. On the ISS, many astronauts experience changes in their vision, a condition believed to be linked to that fluid shift increasing pressure inside the skull, which flattens the back of the eyeball and affects the optic nerve. Will lunar gravity be enough to prevent this? Or will we discover a new, subtler set of neurological and visual changes that only manifest after long exposure to reduced gravity? The vestibular system, our inner ear balance organ, is also going to be in a state of confusion. The cues it receives from the gravity sensors will be consistently weaker than what the brain has been programmed for over a lifetime, likely leading to initial disorientation, motion sickness, and a prolonged period of adaptation where moving and coordinating, especially tasks requiring fine motor skills, could be clumsy and difficult. This has direct implications for safety during critical operations like piloting a lander or performing complex repairs. Then there is the most existential question of all, the point of no return. If the human body adapts too well to lunar gravity, could that adaptation become permanent? Could a person who lives on the moon for 5 or 10 years undergo physiological changes so profound that they could never safely return to Earth's crushing gravity? Their bones might be too weak to support their weight, their heart too deconditioned to pump blood to their brain while standing, and their balance system so altered that the constant sensation of Earth's pull would be utterly debilitating. This turns the concept of a lunar colonist into something more permanent. They might become citizens of the moon, unable to ever visit their home planet again. This is not just a medical issue, it is a profound human and ethical one, requiring informed consent of a magnitude we have never before contemplated. The research to answer these questions is urgent and must begin with the very first long-duration missions. The lunar base will need to be a full-scale biomedical laboratory, equipped with advanced imaging like DEXA scanners for bone density, MRI machines for soft tissue and brain analysis, and continuous monitoring of cardiovascular function. The daily life of astronauts will involve not just exercise, but also a battery of medical tests to track these subtle changes over time. The development of countermeasures is also critical, beyond exercise. We might need specialized centrifuges that spin astronauts to create artificial gravity for a few hours a day, or pharmacological interventions to trick the bones into maintaining their density. The food diet will also play a role, requiring precise levels of calcium, vitamin D, and protein to support skeletal health under these novel conditions. Understanding lunar gravity's effects is not just about protecting the health of lunar explorers. It is the essential gateway to the rest of the solar system. Mars has a gravity about 3 times stronger than the Moon's, but still only 1/3 of Earth's. If we cannot understand and mitigate the effects of 1/6 gravity, we have little hope of preparing for the journey to and life on Mars. The Moon becomes the perfect testbed, a halfway point where we can study partial gravity in a real-world environment just a few days from help, unlike a Mars mission, which would be years from any medical evacuation. In the end, the human body itself is the final and most complex system we must engineer for in space. We are products of Earth's gravity, and venturing into a new gravitational environment is a fundamental step in our evolution as a species. The answers we find will determine the rhythm of life on the Moon, the design of its habitats, the careers of its settlers, and the very future of humanity beyond our cradle. It is a slow, silent experiment, but its results will echo for generations, defining what it means to be human in a universe where Earth is not our only home. The path forward requires patience, meticulous science, and a deep commitment to understanding the vessel that carries our consciousness into the cosmos, ensuring that as we reach for the stars, we do not lose the essence of who we are. After grappling with the subtle ways the Moon's gentle gravity reshapes our bodies, we confront a more immediate and tangible challenge: our absolute dependence on the machines that keep us alive, and the relentless demand to keep them all running flawlessly in an environment that seems designed to break them. A lunar base isn't just a habitat, it's a complex, interconnected web of life support systems, computers, rovers, and robots, each one a potential single point of failure that could turn a mission from success to disaster in a heartbeat. Imagine the sheer number of systems that have to work in perfect harmony every second of every day. The air recyclers that scrub carbon dioxide and provide oxygen, the water purification units that reclaim every drop of moisture, the power distribution networks that channel electricity from solar arrays or nuclear reactors, the communication gear that links us to Earth, and the internal computers that monitor and control it all. Now we'll layer on top of that the external machinery, the robotic rovers that scout the terrain, the construction bots that build and repair structures, and the mining equipment that extracts water ice from the shadows. Every single one of these components is operating under immense stress, battered by temperature swings that would shatter ordinary materials, bombarded by radiation that can fry delicate electronics, and constantly exposed to that abrasive, clingy dust that gets into everything. The failure of any one part isn't just an inconvenience. For example, if a primary oxygen generator fails, the crew has only a limited backup supply. If a main computer glitches, it could lose control of critical environmental functions. If a rover breaks down far from base, it could strand a crew member or lose access to a vital resource site. This isn't like calling a technician for a repair. The crew themselves must be that technician, and they have to be a jack of all trades on a level we've never required before. You can't have a separate specialist for every system because the crew is too small. Instead, each astronaut needs to be a hybrid of engineer, electrician, plumber, programmer, and mechanic, all rolled into one. Their training has to be incredibly broad and deep, covering everything from fixing a leaky valve in the water system to troubleshooting a faulty circuit board in a communication relay to reprogramming a confused robot that's gotten stuck. And they have to do this with a severely limited toolkit and spare parts inventory. You can't possibly bring a spare for every single component that might fail. The mass would be astronomical. This is where in situ resource utilization and advanced manufacturing come to the rescue in a very practical way. The ability to three-dimension print spare parts on demand is a game changer. Imagine a plastic bracket that holds a critical sensor breaks due to thermal stress. Instead of waiting months for a replacement from Earth, the crew can simply download a digital design file and print a new one from a polymer feedstock, or even from sintered lunar regolith for metal parts. This doesn't just apply to small brackets, We're talking about being able to fabricate custom tools, repair patches for hull breaches, or even replacement components for other machines. But this capability itself depends on the printer working reliably, which adds another layer of complexity. The crew needs to be able to maintain and repair the 3D printer too, creating a recursive loop of dependency. Robotics are another essential multiplier for human capability on the moon. Sending humans outside for every little task is risky and time-consuming, requiring suiting up and going through airlock procedures that consume hours and valuable resources. So, we will rely heavily on robots to do the dirty, dull, and dangerous work. Telepresence robots could be controlled from inside the habitat to perform external inspections, clean solar panels, or even conduct delicate scientific experiments without exposing humans to radiation and micrometeoroids. Larger, autonomous rovers could be tasked with hauling regolith for construction or mining ice from permanently shadowed craters. These robots are incredibly valuable, but they are also complex machines with their own set of vulnerabilities. Their joints can be fouled by dust, their sensors can be degraded by radiation, their batteries can fail in the cold, and their software can encounter bugs. Therefore, the human crew must also be roboticists, capable of diagnosing mechanical failures, replacing worn-out motors, and updating software to adapt to new challenges. The maintenance schedule for all this equipment would be relentless, a continuous cycle of inspection, preventive maintenance, and unexpected repairs. This turns daily life on the base into a balance between pursuing scientific goals and simply keeping the lights on. The design philosophy for all this equipment must be simplicity and reliability above all else. Every system should have multiple redundancies. If one pump fails, another should automatically take over. Critical components should be accessible and easy to replace, designed with quick disconnect fittings and modular layouts. The user interfaces for controlling these systems must be intuitive and fail-safe, because in an emergency, there's no time to read a thick manual. This human-machine interface is crucial, whether it's a touchscreen controlling life support or a joystick maneuvering a robotic arm. It needs to be designed for gloved hands and stressed minds. The computers running everything need to be radiation hardened to prevent bit flips and crashes, and they should have robust fault detection systems that can alert the crew to problems before they become critical. Ultimately, the success of a lunar base hinges on creating a symbiotic relationship between the humans and the machines. The humans bring creativity, adaptability, and problem-solving skills, while the machines provide the brute force, precision, and endurance to operate in the lethal environment. But this relationship only works if the humans are empowered to be master troubleshooters, and the machines are built to be as reliable and maintainable as humanly possible. There's no room for planned obsolescence on the moon. Every piece of gear must be designed for a long service life and easy repair. The lessons we learn from this will not only enable a sustained presence on the moon, but will also drive innovations in reliable engineering and maintenance practices that could benefit industries on Earth, from self-diagnosing equipment to advanced 3D printing for on-demand parts. The technologies developed for lunar maintenance could revolutionize how we build and maintain infrastructure in remote or hostile environments on our own planet. As we look to a future where humanity spreads across the solar system, this deep integration of human skill and machine reliability will be the bedrock of every outpost and colony, ensuring that we can not only reach new worlds, but also thrive there, no matter what breaks down. Beyond the immense technical and human hurdles of keeping a lunar base running, we arrive at the most terrestrial of problems, one that has grounded grand visions before, the staggering, almost incomprehensible cost, and the pressing question of who would pay for it all and why. We are not talking about the budget of a large company or even a single nation's space program. We are talking about financial commitments on the scale of hundreds of billions, even trillions, of dollars spread over decades, with no guaranteed return on investment. The initial phase, building the very first foundational outpost, is almost certainly a government-funded endeavour, much like the International Space Station, a project too risky and expensive for any single private entity to shoulder alone. This initial investment covers the research and development of entirely new technologies, from the heavy-lift rockets needed to ferry massive modules to the moon, to the life support systems that must be orders of magnitude more reliable than anything we have today, to the nuclear power systems and communication satellites required to make the base functional. Then comes the cost of the launches themselves. Every single kilogram sent to the lunar surface costs a fortune, and a single habitat module could weigh tens of tons, requiring multiple dedicated launches of the most powerful rockets ever built. The construction phase would be a continuous drain of resources, with mission after mission delivering rovers, construction robots, power systems, and supplies, all before the first astronaut even sets foot for a long-duration stay. This initial outlay is so vast that it would likely require a sustained international partnership, pooling the resources and expertise of multiple nations, each bearing a portion of the financial and technical burden. But even if governments fund the construction of the first base, the question of long-term sustainability remains. A base that permanently relies on taxpayer money for every ounce of food and every watt of power is a vulnerable outpost, constantly at the mercy of political shifts and budget cycles on Earth. For a lunar presence to become permanent and grow, it must eventually develop an economic rationale, a reason to exist beyond pure science and national prestige. It must in some way, start to pay for itself. This is where the concept of a cislunar economy begins to take shape, a vision where the moon becomes an active participant in economic activity, not just a passive destination. One of the most often cited possibilities is mining, specifically for resources that are rare or valuable on Earth. The moon is rich in helium-3, an isotope that is exceedingly rare on our planet but could be a potent fuel for future nuclear fusion reactors. If fusion power becomes a reality, helium-3 could become the oil of the 21st century, making lunar mining an incredibly lucrative enterprise. However, this is a massive if. We do not yet have functioning fusion reactors that can use helium-3, and the technology to mine and process it on the moon on an industrial scale is still science fiction. Another potential resource is water ice, which, as we've discussed, is vital for life support and rocket fuel. A company that could mine and sell water propellant in lunar orbit could create a thriving business, essentially setting up a gas station in space for spacecraft heading to Mars or other destinations, drastically reducing the cost of deep space exploration by allowing ships to refuel without having to lift all their propellant from Earth's deep gravity well. This in-situ resource utilization is the key to breaking the vicious cycle of expensive resupply from Earth. Then there is the concept of tourism, but not the kind we see with suborbital joyrides. This would be ultra-exclusive, ultra-expensive tourism for the wealthiest individuals on the planet, a multi-hundred-million-dollar ticket for a once-in-several-lifetimes trip to a lunar resort. While this might generate some revenue, it is unlikely to be the primary economic driver for a large-scale colony. Other, more speculative ideas include manufacturing in the moon's low-gravity and high-vacuum environment, which could be ideal for creating certain pharmaceuticals or advanced materials like perfect crystal fibers that are difficult to produce on Earth. The moon could also serve as a remote backup for humanity's cultural and genetic heritage, a modern-day Noah's Ark. But that is a service that is difficult to put a price on. The fundamental challenge with all these economic models is that they require a massive upfront investment in infrastructure before the first dollar of revenue is ever generated. A mining operation needs processing plants, power grids, and transportation systems. A propellant depot requires water extraction facilities, electrolysis plants, and storage tanks. This creates a chicken and egg problem. You need the infrastructure to make money, but you need money to build the infrastructure. This is where innovative financing models and public-private partnerships become essential. Governments might build the basic infrastructure, the roads and power lines of the moon, and then lease or sell access to private companies who can then build their businesses on top of that foundation. Another approach is through competitions and prizes, where a government or consortium offers a large cash prize to the first company that can, for example, deliver a certain amount of processed water to lunar orbit, spurring private innovation and investment. The economic sustainability of a lunar base is also tied to its ability to reduce its own costs through autonomy and in-situ resource utilization. Every kilogram of water, oxygen, or building material produced on the moon is a kilogram that doesn't have to be launched from Earth, saving tens of thousands of dollars. Over time, as the base becomes more self-sufficient, the ongoing operating costs could decrease, making it a more attractive long-term investment. However, the sheer scale of the initial investment is so large, and the risks so high, that without a clear and compelling economic return, a lunar base may never progress beyond a small, government-subsidized science station, a symbolic presence rather than a thriving community. The decision to build a permanent lunar base is therefore not just a technical or scientific one. It is a grand economic wager on the future, a bet that the resources and opportunities of the moon will eventually justify the colossal expense. It requires a long-term vision that transcends political election cycles and quarterly profit reports, a belief that humanity's expansion into the solar system is not just an adventure, but a necessary and ultimately profitable step in our evolution. Without this economic engine, the dream of a lunar city will remain just that, a dream confined to the pages of science fiction, a ghost station waiting for a reason to exist. The path forward is as much about spreadsheets and business plans as it is about rockets and habitats. And solving this financial puzzle may be the most difficult challenge of all, as we wrestle with the economic equations needed to fund a lunar future. A more subtle but equally critical issue emerges from the shadows: the environmental and ethical footprint we will leave on this pristine world, forcing us to confront our role not just as explorers, but as stewards of a new frontier. The moment we establish a permanent presence, we begin to pollute the moon. It is an unavoidable consequence of human activity, even with the most stringent precautions. The sources of this pollution are numerous and insidious. Consider the simple issue of waste management. The crew will generate trash, packaging from supplies, broken equipment, human waste, and other byproducts of daily life. On Earth, we have vast ecosystems and processing facilities to handle this, but on the moon, there is no microbial life to break down organic matter, no atmosphere to disperse gases, and no water to dilute chemicals. Waste will accumulate, and unless we develop a perfect recycling system, which is practically impossible, we will have to store it or dispose of it on the surface. Imagine landfills of sealed containers piling up near the base, a permanent scar on the landscape. Then there is the inevitable debris from spaceflight itself, spent rocket stages, discarded landing gear, and the skeletons of old rovers and satellites that have reached the end of their lives. This isn't just an eyesore, it becomes a practical hazard. A discarded piece of metal sitting on the surface will be continuously bombarded by micrometeoroids and radiation, slowly degrading and potentially releasing contaminants into the very tenuous exosphere, or becoming a source of dangerous shrapnel if struck by a larger impact. The abrasive dust we kick up during construction and driving will not just settle neatly, it will be electrostatically charged and can travel surprisingly far, contaminating areas well beyond our immediate operations. This dust could coat sensitive scientific instruments deployed to study the pristine lunar environment, effectively ruining their readings before they even begin. Furthermore, any industrial activity, such as mining for water ice or processing regolith, will create localized pollution, whether it's chemical residues from extraction processes or the disturbance of ancient, untouched geological records. But beyond this general environmental impact lies a more specific and poignant challenge: the preservation of our own history. The Apollo landing sites are not just collections of old hardware. They are archaeological treasures, the very places where humanity first took its tentative steps on another world. The American flags, the lunar module's descent stages, the footprints in the dust. These are fragile relics of immense historical significance. They are currently protected by their isolation, but that changes the moment we return with new missions. The exhaust plume from a modern lander touching down even a kilometre away could blast these sites with high-velocity dust, scouring and erasing the very footprints we went there to see. A rover driving too close could irrevocably disturb the delicate arrangement of artifacts. This raises complex questions. How do we define a buffer zone around these sites? Is the entire Sea of Tranquility now a historical district where no landings are permitted? What about the sites of other nations' achievements, like the Chinese rovers? The need for protection is clear, but the mechanism is fraught with difficulty. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 states that celestial bodies are not subject to national appropriation, but it is silent on the issue of preserving historic sites. There is no international law, no lunar park ranger, to enforce these boundaries. This creates a potential for conflict even before the first foundation is poured. One nation's vital base location might be another nation's sacred historical site. Establishing protocols for this is a diplomatic minefield. It requires agreement on what constitutes a protected area, how large the protective perimeter should be, and what activities are permitted within it. Should we allow tourist visits to the Apollo site? If so, How do we manage them without causing damage? Or should they be left completely untouched, observed only from orbit, as monuments to a bygone era of exploration? These are not just technical questions. They are ethical ones that speak to our values as a species expanding into the cosmos. Are we going to treat the moon as a new world to be shaped for our needs, or as a museum preserving the record of our first encounters? The answer is likely a difficult balance between the two. This necessitates the development of a lunar code of conduct long before operations begin. This would include strict guidelines for landing and launch corridors to minimize plume contamination near sensitive areas, rules for waste management and recycling to limit long-term pollution, and agreements on the designation and management of historical zones. It would also need to address the issue of planetary protection in reverse. While the moon is not thought to host life, we must be careful not to contaminate it with Earth organisms that could compromise future scientific searches for indigenous organic compounds or fossilized evidence of ancient life. Every piece of equipment, every astronaut, is a potential vector for terrestrial microbes that could, in theory, survive in sheltered niches, confounding future scientific investigations. The very act of living on the moon forces us to grow up as a spacefaring civilization. We can no longer be the careless visitors who leave a flag and some footprints and depart. We are becoming residents, and with that comes a responsibility to the environment we are entering, even if that environment is a harsh and airless one. The choices we make now will set a precedent for all future exploration, for our treatment of Mars and beyond. Will we be known as the generation that brought sustainability and reverence to the solar system, or as the one that littered the worlds we explored with our technological detritus? Solving the problem of lunar pollution and preservation is not about stopping progress. It is about guiding it wisely, ensuring that our expansion into space is done with foresight, respect, and a commitment to preserving the unique and irreplaceable value of the worlds we are so privileged to visit. It is a test of our maturity, and passing, it is essential for claiming a future we can be proud of. The silent, pristine desolation of the moon is a canvas upon which we will paint our character as a species, and the brushstrokes of our first permanent settlements will be remembered for millennia. The need for a code of conduct and the preservation of historical sites immediately plunges us into the most complex and potentially contentious arena of all, the politics of governance, a question that has plagued human expansion for centuries and now finds its way to the lunar surface, asking who exactly gets to make the rules for this new world. The foundational law we have is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, a monumental document for its time that successfully established that no nation could claim sovereignty over the moon or any other celestial body, effectively preventing a colonial land grab in space. But this treaty was written in an era when permanent habitation was a distant dream, and its language is frustratingly vague when it comes to the practicalities of exploitation and settlement. It clearly says you cannot claim territory. But what does that mean for a company that wants to mine a specific crater for water ice? Can they own the resources they extract, even if they cannot own the land itself? The treaty is silent on this, creating a legal grey area that is ripe for dispute and conflict. This ambiguity becomes a critical problem the moment we start building. If a consortium of nations builds a base, whose laws apply inside that habitat? Is it the laws of the leading nation, or a mix of all partners? What happens if two astronauts from different countries have a serious conflict that constitutes a crime? Who has jurisdiction? There is no lunar police force or international court with authority on the moon to handle such matters. This extends to commercial activities. If a private company from one country sets up a mining operation next to a scientific outpost from another country, and the mining activities, like dust plumes or vibrations, disrupt the sensitive experiments of the outpost, how is that dispute resolved? There is no established environmental regulation or zoning board on the moon. The current framework relies on national governments to authorise and supervise the activities of their non-governmental entities, But what if two countries have wildly different standards for safety, environmental protection, or worker rights? This could lead to a race to the bottom, where companies incorporate under the flag of the nation with the most permissive and least restrictive regulations to maximize profit, creating potentially dangerous and unethical situations 230,000 miles from any oversight. The situation becomes even more volatile when we consider the distribution of valuable resources. The most sought-after real estate on the Moon is likely the polar regions, where water ice exists in permanently shadowed craters. These areas are limited. What happens when two separate entities, be they national or corporate, target the same crater? There is no clear mechanism for establishing priority or resolving such a claim-staking conflict. Without a robust legal framework, the Moon could devolve into a chaotic free-for-all, with competing interests leading to tension, sabotage, or even open conflict, effectively projecting terrestrial disputes onto a new stage. The solution, many argue, is a new international agreement, a lunar version of the Antarctic Treaty System, which successfully governs that continent for peaceful scientific research and suspends territorial claims. But the Moon is different from Antarctica. The potential for commercial resource extraction is far greater, and the strategic military implications, while prohibited by the Outer Space Treaty, are nonetheless a concern for major powers. Negotiating such a treaty in today's multipolar and often contentious global political environment is a Herculean task. It would require nations to surrender a degree of autonomy and agree to common rules, something that is increasingly difficult in an age of rising nationalism and geopolitical rivalry. The Artemis Accords, led by the United States, are one attempt to establish a set of principles for cooperative lunar exploration, including commitments to transparency, interoperability, and the protection of heritage sites. However, not all major spacefaring nations have signed these accords, with some, like Russia and China, viewing them with suspicion as an attempt to create a US-dominated lunar order. This risks the creation of competing blocs on the Moon, each with its own rules, standards, and infrastructure. A scenario that is inefficient and potentially dangerous. Imagine a future where there is an Artemis base in one region and a competing international lunar research station in another, with little to no cooperation between them, duplicating efforts and creating a Cold War in cislunar space. The governance challenge also extends to daily operations. How are common resources, like the lunar orbit for communication satellites, managed to avoid congestion and signal interference? Who is responsible for managing and disposing of space debris in lunar orbit? How do we prevent one entity's activities from contaminating the scientific work of another? These are not abstract questions. They are operational necessities that require some form of administrative body. This would likely start as a voluntary coordinating committee, but could eventually evolve into a more formal international lunar authority, tasked with granting licenses for activities, managing traffic, setting safety standards, and acting as a dispute resolution body. However, granting any such authority real power is a political third rail. Nations are notoriously reluctant to cede sovereignty, and corporations will resist any regulation that cuts into their profits. The path forward is therefore messy and incremental. It will likely involve a patchwork of bilateral and multilateral agreements, building up from practical cooperation on specific issues like communication standards and emergency rescue protocols. Over time, as interdependence grows, these agreements could coalesce into a more comprehensive system. The alternative, a lawless lunar frontier, is untenable for a sustainable and peaceful presence. The political framework we build now will set the tone for humanity's future throughout the solar system. It is a test of our ability to overcome our earthly divisions and collaborate on a grand scale. The question of who rules the Moon does not have to have a single answer like a world government. It can be a complex system of shared governance where nations and private entities agree to abide by a common set of rules for the benefit of all. Getting this right is perhaps the most important non-technical challenge we face, because without a stable and agreed-upon political and legal structure, the technological marvel of a lunar base could be undermined by the same old human failings of conflict and competition. The silence of space is waiting to be filled, not with the noise of disagreement, but with the coordinated hum of international cooperation, proving that we can learn from our history and create a better way forward as we reach for the stars. The work of diplomats and lawyers is now as crucial as that of rocket scientists and engineers, for they are building the invisible foundations upon which our lunar society will stand. But even as we grapple with the complex political frameworks needed to govern lunar activities, a more immediate and tangible danger looms much closer to home. A problem of our own making that threatens every single mission before it even leaves Earth's vicinity. The escalating crisis of orbital debris, a swirling shell of space junk that turns the vital highways to the moon into a potentially lethal obstacle course. Imagine trying to navigate a busy freeway during a hailstorm where every piece of hail is a high-speed bullet that is essentially the environment in low Earth orbit. Today, a region crammed with defunct satellites, spent rocket stages, fragmentation, debris from collisions and explosions, and even tiny flakes of paint, all travelling at velocities exceeding 27,000 kilometers per hour. At those speeds, which are about 10 times faster than a rifle bullet, even a fragment the size of a marble possesses the kinetic energy of a grenade, capable of completely destroying a functioning satellite or punching a catastrophic hole in a crewed spacecraft. This isn't a theoretical risk. The International Space Station regularly performs maneuvers to avoid tracked debris, and the windows of the Space Shuttle were often replaced due to pits caused by impacts with tiny paint particles. Now, consider that every spacecraft bound for the moon must first ascend through this congested shell, a gauntlet that adds a layer of immense risk to the already perilous launch phase. A mission could end before it even truly begins if a piece of debris, too small to be reliably tracked by current systems, intersects with the rocket during its climb to orbit. The windows for launch are not just about weather and orbital mechanics anymore, or they must also account for the cluttered pathways through this digital junkyard. The problem is compounded by the fact that debris begets more debris through a cascading effect known as the Kessler syndrome, where one collision creates thousands of new fragments, each capable of causing further collisions, potentially rendering entire orbital regions unusable for generations. This isn't just about low Earth orbit. The threat extends all the way to the moon. The space between Earth and the moon, cislunar space, is becoming increasingly trafficked with communication satellites, weather monitors, and scientific probes, and each new mission leaves behind the potential for more junk. Once we establish a lunar base, the orbit around the moon itself will become a critical operational zone, cluttered with lunar satellites for navigation and communication, landers, and supply vehicles. If we are not careful, we could replicate the mistakes of Earth orbit and create a lunar debris belt that poses a constant threat to operations around the moon. A single piece of debris in lunar orbit, travelling at slower but still significant speeds, could cripple a critical communication satellite, severing the base's link to Earth, or cause a catastrophic failure in a crewed vehicle preparing to land or depart. The consequences of a debris impact on a lunar habitat, while perhaps less immediately violent than in the vacuum of space due to the moon's gravity, would still be devastating, potentially compromising pressurization and life support systems. The insidious nature of this problem is that it is largely invisible and silent until a collision occurs, and by then, it is too late. Addressing this requires a two-pronged approach: mitigation and active removal. Mitigation involves designing new spacecraft and missions with end-of-life plans that responsibly deorbit hardware or move it to a graveyard orbit, reducing the chance of it becoming a hazard. This means building satellites with built-in propulsion for disposal and designing rockets to passivate their upper stages, preventing explosions that create debris clouds. However, Mitigation alone is insufficient because we are already dealing with a massive existing population of debris. This is where active debris removal technologies become essential, and this field is still in its infancy. Concepts include using nets, harpoons, or robotic arms to capture large defunct satellites and drag them down to burn up in the atmosphere. Other ideas involve laser brooms that could nudge smaller pieces into decay orbits, or even large foam balls that would collide with debris to slow it down. But all these technologies face enormous technical and financial hurdles, and they require international cooperation and funding, which brings us back to the political challenges. Who is responsible for cleaning up a piece of debris? The country that launched it? A private company? An international consortium? The legal and liability frameworks are murky. Furthermore, any active debris removal system could be misperceived as an anti-satellite weapon, raising geopolitical tensions. For lunar missions specifically, we need to develop rigorous traffic management protocols for cislunar space, similar to air traffic control but on a solar system scale. This would involve tracking objects much smaller than we currently can and having shared international databases for collision avoidance. Every new mission to the Moon must be designed with debris prevention as a core principle, ensuring that no new long-lived junk is left in critical orbital pathways. This includes designing lunar orbiters to be deorbited into the Moon at the end of their lives, or moved to a stable disposal orbit. The base itself will need protocols for managing its own waste to prevent accidental creation of lunar orbital debris. The cost of inaction is unacceptably high. A single major collision in a key orbital lane could make accessing the Moon prohibitively risky for years, stranding any base and halting exploration. Solving the debris problem is therefore not an optional extra. It is a fundamental prerequisite for safe and sustainable lunar exploration. It is a testament to the interconnectedness of our endeavours in space that a problem created in Earth orbit can have such profound implications for a base on the Moon, hundreds of thousands of kilometres away. The silent, invisible cloud of junk we have created is a challenge that demands global attention, innovation, and cooperation, proving that our future in space depends not only on reaching new destinations, but also on cleaning up the mess we leave behind on the way. The technology we develop to manage and remove orbital debris will be as crucial as the rockets that carry us aloft, ensuring that the pathways to the stars remain open for generations to come. As we look up at the Moon and dream of homes there, we must also look around our own planet and commit to being better stewards of the orbital environment, because every journey to that new world begins with a safe passage through our own cluttered backyard. This effort will require a sustained commitment from governments, private industry, and the international community, working together to develop the standards, technologies, and treaties needed to tame the orbital wilderness we have created. The task is daunting, but the alternative, a future where space is too dangerous to traverse, is simply not an option if we are serious about becoming a multiplanetary species. The cleanup must begin now, before the problem grows beyond our ability to control, ensuring that the door to the Moon and beyond remains wide open. After navigating the modern minefield of orbital debris, it's worth pausing to look back at the very endeavours that opened this pathway, the Apollo missions, whose stunning success inadvertently crafted a dangerous and persistent myth that still shapes our perspective today. The image is iconic, a grainy video of an astronaut bouncing lightly on the grey surface, planting a flag, and returning home safely. It looks almost simple, like a camping trip to a nearby park. But this perception is a grand illusion, a sleight of hand performed by incredible bravery and cutting-edge engineering that masked the sheer raw risk of every single moment. Those missions were not the beginning of an easy commute. They were the ultimate high-wire act, with no safety net, where the smallest error could have, and almost did, lead to catastrophic failure. The Apollo program was a monumental achievement, but it was designed for a specific, limited goal. Get there, leave a mark, collect some rocks, and return, all within a matter of days. The entire architecture was built around this flags and footprints model, where longevity and sustainability were not just secondary, they were non-existent. The lunar module was a fragile, tinfoil-thin craft designed to be used once and discarded. The astronauts lived on borrowed time and limited supplies, and every system was pushed to its absolute limit with a margin for error that would be unthinkable in any modern engineering project today. They succeeded through a combination of brilliant problem-solving, meticulous preparation, and more than a little luck, but that success has left us with a distorted sense of what it takes to actually live on the moon. The public memory has condensed those years of effort, the lives lost, the billions spent, and the constant brinkmanship into a neat narrative. We went to the moon with computers less powerful than your smartphone. So why is it so hard now? This question fundamentally misunderstands the difference between a visit and a residence. Imagine the difference between spending a weekend camping in the desert versus building a fully self-sustaining city there. For your weekend trip, you bring a tent, some canned food, and a bottle of water. If something goes wrong, you pack up and drive home. Building a city, however, requires you to find a permanent water source, grow your own food, generate your own power, manage waste, establish law and order, and create a society that can thrive for generations. The Apollo missions were that weekend camping trip. A lunar base is the city. The challenges we face now are not about getting there and back quickly. They are about staying there indefinitely. And that introduces a whole new universe of problems that Apollo never had to solve. The astronauts didn't worry about the long-term effects of lunar dust on their health because their exposure was brief. They didn't need to grow food because they brought enough for a few days. They didn't have to survive the 14-day lunar night because they only landed during the lunar day. Their missions were audacious sprints, while a base requires a marathon runner's endurance, with systems that must function flawlessly for years, not just days. The technological leap from Apollo to a permanent base is not incremental, it is revolutionary. We need to develop closed-loop life support systems that recycle air and water with near-perfect efficiency, something we are still perfecting on the International Space Station but must be far more robust for the Moon. We need power systems that can endure the long, cold night, whether through massive energy storage or nuclear reactors. We need habitats that can protect humans from radiation and micrometeoroids for decades, not just during a short walk. And perhaps most dauntingly, we need to create an entire economic and logistical chain to support this endeavour, which Apollo avoided by being a purely government-funded, short-term, national project. The cost of Apollo was astronomical for its time, and a permanent base will require sustained investment that dwarfs those figures, spread over many years and likely involving international partners and private companies. This financial reality is often overlooked in the nostalgic glow of the past. The public, inspired by those old videos, might wonder why we are struggling to return, not realizing that the goalposts have moved dramatically. We are not trying to reenact Apollo. We are trying to build something that has never existed before. The illusion of simplicity also affects political will and funding. It is harder to rally support for a long, expensive, and technically complex grind when the memory is of a quick, glorious victory. This perception gap can lead to unrealistic expectations, impatience, and a lack of understanding when setbacks inevitably occur. Overcoming this illusion is the first and perhaps most crucial step in honestly approaching the lunar base project. It requires us to respect the moon not as a destination we have already conquered, but as a frontier that demands a new level of commitment, innovation, and humility. We must study the lessons of Apollo not as a blueprint to copy, but as a foundation to build upon, recognizing both its triumphs and its limitations. The engineers of the 1960s were heroes who did the impossible with the tools they had. Our challenge is to do the seemingly impossible with a new set of tools and for a much longer duration. This means embracing the complexity rather than hiding from it, communicating the true scale of the challenge to the public, and building the broad coalition needed to see it through. The legacy of Apollo is not that it made the moon easy, it is that it showed us we could reach it, and in doing so, it gave us a glimpse of the far greater challenges that lie ahead in making it a home. As we stand on the shoulders of those giants, we must look forward with clear eyes, acknowledging the immense difficulty of the task, but also with the same bold spirit that characterized that era. The path to a lunar base is not a simple retracing of old steps. It is a new journey into uncharted territory, and it deserves our utmost respect and careful planning. The illusion of simplicity is a comforting story, but reality is far more complex and, in its own way, far more inspiring. By facing these challenges head-on, we honour the Apollo legacy not by repeating it, but by expanding upon it, proving that humanity's reach can extend beyond flags and footprints to a lasting presence among the stars. This requires a cultural shift as much as a technological one, where we celebrate the gritty, long-term work of building sustainability as much as we celebrate the thrilling moments of launch and landing. The moon is waiting, not as a trophy from a past race, but as a new world to be understood and inhabited, and that is a mission worthy of all the complexity it entails.